So I should be live, and I'm here with one of my old. Well, I guess maybe I hope we're going live. I'm here with my older friend Fritz Imperial, and we are discussing, I guess, American culture. So for people who may have subscribed to my channel very recently, Fritz was one of sort of the original set of YouTubers that started up channels in 2016, and we were sort of doing the neo reaction thing before that was really a thing. I don't know if you describe yourself that way, but being sort of a prominent monarchist, I always kind of assumed that your views were kind of more or less along that direction. So I don't know what the status of your channel is now, but maybe you want to introduce yourself, Fritz. And
yeah. I mean, I've been kind of on and off in the past few years, just kind of trying to figure out both things in my own personal life and, just trying to figure out a direction. Because at first it was trying to be, just a Christian conservative Sargon, i.e. making rebuttal videos, but this time against kind of atheists and a lot of the other leftists. But, I kind of just got tired of that and kind of trying to focus on something that might be more productive. And of course, now having a well-paying full-time job kind of really disincentivizes me. But I have actually had a lot of good ideas recently in terms of just commentating on certain culture, like kind of what made me kind of want to have this stream is I've been getting into H.P. Lovecraft recently, and as somebody who both religiously I kind of divorced myself from kind of classic American Protestantism, i.e. I became Roman Catholic, and also the American political project by being kind of a reactionary monarchist. I still find myself, I suppose, both because of my, my cultural ancestry, I still drawn to and attached to works of American culture. And I found that there's not really much of a contradiction there, considering that works of culture should be able to stand independent of the countries and politics that they're from. I mean, and H.P. Lovecraft himself described himself as essentially a monarchist and a believer in aristocracy. So,
yeah, a lot of these people are what you'll see, I think, in early American literature are both the strands of genuine reactionary thought intermingling and crossbreeding with the predecessors of what we would call the cathedral or the mainstream thought. So you'll have people like Jack London and earlier than him, the Transcendentalists, Thoreau, and people like that. These people all come from this long line of New England progressives that now is transmogrified into our current ruling Brahmin class. But in that, you'll also see sort of reactionary elements like H.P. Lovecraft, sort of the old Tory tradition. And so it can kind of be, it's a very interesting stew. And what's more interesting than that is when you come to things like, I know you mentioned off stream, you mentioned Melville, which is an author I very recently have read. I guess that would be last year, but that's still fairly recent. I recently read Moby Dick. And it's interesting because you simultaneously have a kind of reactionary sensibility, while at the same time, him coming from the very class that seeded Harvard and Yale and the rest of these institutions with sort of their progressive sensibilities.
And what's funny is that, like, something I'd commentate on is because I want to go through more of the canon. I guess I kind of consider this as like the three main members of the American literary canon of the Northeast. We're going to ignore Samuel Clemens for now. I have my own thoughts on him, but
he's more Southern. I know he wrote in San Francisco, but he's associated with like Mississippi and stuff.
Yeah, and but the kind of classic Northeastern canon of Edgar Allan Poe or Herman Melville and H.P. Lovecraft. And I find Lovecraft especially interesting, especially because you recently had your kind of video or your distans kind of talking about like moderns like to wear the skin of old culture, but either don't really have any understanding of what that culture was or hate it. And Lovecraft is kind of an embodiment of this, where he really appealed to, I think, about 10, 15 years ago to, I guess, 5 years ago, to this kind of class of young atheistic liberals on the internet. Like, I don't know if you know who Yahtzee Croshaw is from The Escapist.
Was he the guy who did a zero punctuation?
Yeah, he's like the perfect embodiment of this, of somebody who like kind of created his own like video game mythos based on Lovecraft, because people like that, they want to wear Lovecraft's skin. They love the idea of them being the outsider atheist that sees like religion for what it really, the farce it really is, and like to write about, you know, because a lot of progressives seem to have some sort of fetish for cosmic insignificance, even though Lovecraft just deliberately made that idea as a horror concept rather than something people should be happy about. But when they actually, but at the same time, these people absolutely despise and hate not only Lovecraft's views themselves, but the entire culture that he kind of came from and represented. And this kind of became embodied in like video game like BioShock Infinite, which is just anything that is nice about early 20th century America is based on pure evil and is not allowed, and you're not allowed to enjoy it.
Well, it's kind of funny because I both did a huge video both on BioShock Infinite and H.P. Lovecraft. So that's interesting you mentioned those two things. I know that Lovecraft is difficult because, you know, as far as he goes philosophically, I most associate Lovecraft now with Nick Land, who's like a turbo reactionary, kind of depressingly black-pilled, but he's imagistically the one. If you're to like politically H.P. Lovecraft, I immediately think of Nick Land. Yeah, I mean I think Jonathan Bowden also did sort of his, you know, he did this. I mean, Jonathan Bowden passed away many years ago, but he also kind of famously did this sort of like the highly reactionary nature of H.P. Lovecraft and how he's kind of difficult for a modern mind to parse because you can't really understand it without, well, I mean, like, you can always understand it. You can always understand sort of cosmic horror. That's very easy to understand. But it's also, it's hard to understand some of the sort of contamination horror that he really alludes to in something like The Dunwich Horror or Shadows over Innsmouth or something like that.
And it's funny that what I was going to say is that he's also somebody that I think is a very clear example of, you know, liberals that really liked H.P. Lovecraft, and I guess a lot of the same people that kind of liked the steampunk and all of that. It's when the Great Awakening happened, and like, you know, the contradictions between the stuff they like about H.P. Lovecraft and their own politics became so great that, you know, we all know who has to win out in this. And basically, I think Lovecraft has been now kind of cast aside. Outside of there was that show based on the book Lovecraft County, which is, you know, just this embodiment of, we absolutely despise Lovecraft and the WASP, you know, white culture that he was from and represented, but we still kind of like some of these ideas. So we're just going to make like, hey, what if the cosmic horror, instead of like, you know, the elder gods, it's just racism, you know?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, the thing is, I mean, this is sort of an embodiment of the impoverishment of the progressive mind, where they just, and this is just something like all people should be able to appreciate imagistically works of fiction that come from outside of their religion or worldview. Like, you know, I'm a huge fan of War and Peace, even though Tolstoy was kind of a heretic, right? And I appreciate something like, trying to think of a good example from Japanese literature. I don't know. From Chinese literature, I'll say like The Art of War, even though I'm not whatever Sun Tzu was. I don't think he was a Confucian. I think that's a little bit too early. But you know, this is I can appreciate these things from other cultures, but progressives have lost that ability, and that's actually quite sad.
It's one of the kind of great sadnesses of critical theory, not just critical race theory, but back in college when you take an English course, and it's just like, we're going to arbitrarily, look at these works of literature through this specific lens, and we have to discuss them through these, instead of trying to appreciate an understanding of the culture that it actually came from, and trying to just have at least some form of enjoyment of the work itself. It's basically just trying to prevent people from enjoying things, because nobody has fun looking at Shakespeare through a Marxist lens.
Well, it's the great irony, though, is that the original critical theorists like Adorno and all these other people. Excuse me, I feel like I'm speaking up. My microphone's getting. I need to get a better mic. But
I can hear you fine.
Okay, so but all of these people, all these critical theorists like Adorno and people who Marcuse and people who wrote in the 50s who started critical theory, they were criticizing culture because they thought that like American culture had just become degenerate. They were communists, but they were sort of these old school, old world communists who only liked classical music. And they're a big example of capitalism ruining culture was jazz and like jazz culture. And you just think about these people and you're wondering, like, basically they, at this stage, their theories are, and I know this is going through like 3 or 4 iterations across the late 20th century, but in essence, their theories are ironically, one of the main fueling elements to a kind of degeneration that's beyond anything they could possibly have imagined. We now have an intellectual class that thinks any kind of high culture is tantamount to white supremacy.
And this, something I was thinking of is it kind of provides people on the right or the other side of it, or just anybody that's a non-progressive, with a golden opportunity, considering just the jettisoning of that is, because I think one of the greatest mistakes of the conflict between conservatives and liberals in the late 20th centuries, when the kind of fusionists and neoconservatives started in the Reagan Revolution, one of their biggest mistakes, I think, and you might agree, is kind of abandoning the idea of high culture to the liberals, to the progressives, of saying, oh, they can be the kind of effeminate, artsy fartsy, they like their NPR, and they can be the ones with the high culture, but then while appealing, saying, well, we're with the people, the American masses that like their football and just their pop music and stuff like that. Yeah, meanwhile, at first, it not only, I think it's also an insult to just the capacity of average people, because like Shakespeare was something that was designed to appeal to anybody. It had, aspects that pretty much anybody could enjoy in it. So the idea that, the average person is completely incapable of enjoying anything that is highbrow, I think is almost insulting.
Well, I think this is sort of a generational thing, because conservatives, when you look at people like William F. Buckley, they were definitely high culture or bust type people. When you look at him in the 50s and 60s, he's one of these people who thinks, Yale should be teaching only classics or something like that. And maybe I'm exaggerating, but he believes in a very purified high culture diet. And then by the time you get that movement and it rolls around to the Reagan Revolution, the GOP realizes that it's picking up most of its gains from lower middle class whites, and that it's entirely lost the academy. And then it's sort of forced to pull off this anti-intellectual move across the 80s and 90s. But I think that was a very late development. And I'm going to quote Moldbug here. I don't think conservatives lost high culture because they didn't want it. I think they lost it because they couldn't pull it off anymore. They didn't have the ability. People don't become unfashionable because they want to be unfashionable. They become unfashionable because they can't pull off fashionable. And the thing is that
fake.
Yeah, they look fake. And the thing is that what the conservative movement had developed in the 80s and 90s were all the people that the progressive movement didn't want anymore. And those people weren't game for high culture so much. That wasn't really their thing. And I don't know. This is sort of what I'm trying to comprehend at this stage. I'm struggling with this intellectually. I can say that like I want to do X, I want to do Y, and we can point out all retroactively the moves that the conservative movement failed to do. But how much of this was circumstantial? Like they literally couldn't do it because they didn't have the energy or the right people to do it. When all of the university high culture people are progressives, how do you run high culture in your conservative movement?
Yeah, that's a good point. Though looking at it now, it's almost almost an example of like progressives is basically just a jettisoned high culture in terms of
this
revolution.
This might be like a turning point. That might be what we're seeing. I mean, they might be so stupid that they'll do this, right? They've done it to a certain extent, but you always wonder, like, are they going to be stupid enough to like fire their classical musicians and their ballerinas because of Mo white supremacy?
I mean, I don't put a lot past them. They've done certain things that I think are becoming an opportunity, but kind of my idea of like rediscovering kind of American literary culture, especially, is that you always hear like, well, we need more conservative or Christian movies or books, or we need somebody to be a great writer. But the thing is, like, one of the reasons why quote unquote Christian movies or conservative movies or books are so bad is that like it's just inherently political or just preaching. Because I mean, a lot of these writers, I don't know, it's like your average conservative novel is just going to be about fighting terrorists. It's just going to be kind of like a Tom Clancy novel, as opposed to like, if somebody, how do you expect somebody that loves that just watches NASCAR to like write the next great American novel?
That's a good question because, I mean, it's a good question, but I don't know. I mean, I don't really read a lot of conservative novels to be. I didn't even know. I was vaguely aware that genre exists because I know that Ben Shapiro has written a novel,
and that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I can't imagine that isn't dying if it's not already dead. I mean, I don't know what. I think that I think this, like the fall of Kabul today. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
This sort of conservative incorporated world is it's so obsolete. It was obsolete in 2016, but now it's just incredibly obsolete. Mm-hmm. And you see people and you just cringe when you see them talking about the GOP like it's some kind of serious party.
People still thinking it was at 92 or 94 when you had like the GOP takeover of Congress, right? People still acting like it's 1994. Like I was born then. That was 27 years ago. It's just it's like it's hard to like understand. Like I really want to pick the brain of somebody like Charlie Kirk or like a bow tie college Republican of like, are they really just kind of like robots? Like, do they have fun? Like, what do they read? What do they watch? What do they listen to?
I mean, they think. I mean, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. They have principles. They see what the left does in terms of activism. If you're an activist for the left, college is a very, very easy career. It's not a very easy career path because there's so many people doing it. But there is this activist career path through college that actually results in a career, a political career, or an activism career on the left. On the right, there is not that. So if you're a right winger, you're like, oh my God, what if I just do this whole leftist thing? What if I breed Saul Alinsky and just apply their tactics? But for the right, that's pretty much the motivating logic behind Charlie Kirk. And all of his sort of mental acrobatics that people rightfully make fun of him for, I mean, maybe for Charlie Kirk specifically, it might be completely a grift, but for most of the other people who follow him, it's more, I think it'd be more accurately described as a cope. Yeah. Left-wing activist politics don't work for people who are going against the academic establishment. They're not that kind of thing. Furthermore, just constitutionally, it's easier to push left than it is to push right in any time, right? So there's a lot of things that just don't work about this worldview, I think that we're seeing people reacting to a fantasy that there's some kind of symmetry between Republicans and Democrats, between conservatism and between progressivism, when in fact there is no symmetry whatsoever.
It's the age old thing of like, well, we don't want to adopt left wing tactics because they might use it against us. Whilst literally the left wing does that. Like,
no, it's actually the opposite. Actually, it's let's adopt left wing tactics, and then why aren't they working? For us, right? Like there's one thing where it's like, we're too principled to play dirty, and that you're right about that. That's a real thing, and that's sort of cringe in itself, in my opinion. But there's a second level below that, which is if you start to play dirty, you'll realize very quickly that dirty right-wing politics don't work the way the dirty left-wing politics do. I mean, let's look at January. We're still doing this, right? We're still. Yep. I don't pay attention to the news barely at all.
They're still
doing it, right? They're still milking this thing. Like, it's been 6 months, and thousands of people have died from the crime spike that's been brought about by the George Floyd riots. I mean, what the hell is going on? And we're still talking about this riot that, a few people died in, and all of the people who died were protesters.
And none of them were, and I don't think any of them were armed. And the thing is that what this has really shown is that even protests like that, or not so much that, but like the anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown, all these, I guess, ostensibly kind of right-wing protests. It shows protests are ironically only effective when the actual power structure is already sympathetic to it.
That's what they are, right? Protests are essentially speaking power to truth.
The only actual effect it can have if the power structure doesn't support it is if it actually goes violent and you physically stop some form of legislation from happening by occupying government buildings, which I guess that's all January 6th did.
And even if you do that, what does it actually do? Right?
It's ultimately completely counterproductive.
They reconvene the next day, and then you're back to where you started, right?
Exactly.
But the idea of a protest is a threat of some kind of. I mean, it is a threat. In some sense, the Democrats are right that, in the classic sense, these sort of riots are an implicit threat of some kind of weird government takeover. Mm-hmm. That's what like they were in the 19th century. For the Democrats, they work because basically they use these riots to intimidate people and to back moderates into corners. But they don't work for Republicans because Republicans don't have that kind of activist apparatus inside the party, nor could they really get it, because these activist apparatuses come from the universities, which are not right-wing.
Mm-hmm. And it's and you have the same thing of even the kind of populists on Twitter or something. It's people will go the Paul Joseph Watsons or something, where it's oh, look at all these people in France protesting against the vaccine measures, and then literally it's they'll say, oh, France has fallen the next day, when it shows French police demanding COVID vaccines or vaccine cards. It's back in 2012, when the French Parliament, I think it was either them or the courts, I think it was Parliament, legalized same-sex marriage. You had hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting against it. It accomplished nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the politics in this activist sense, or dirty politics, just does not work for right-wing forces. And I don't know. I know that people think this is defeatist. I know people don't like people pointing it out. I don't see how this isn't just insanely obvious at this stage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and it gets just tiring. With the. I mean, you'll agree with me. This might be preaching the choir, right? But it's just getting tired of basic bitch conservatives. At the place I work is actually is filled with a lot of boomer conservatives, which it's at least then it's still a lot better than working with progressives. But a bunch of them were at lunch were kind of complaining about, oh, this thing about the COVID or this thing about the lockdowns or something. And I almost just kind of just got a little frustrated and just said, well, what I'm actually more annoyed with is that you had all, all conservatives have done for the past year and a half is complain, and they've done absolutely nothing. Now, they rightly said, like, well, what were they supposed to do?
Yeah, that's what I would ask. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, but the thing is, that's not the question. That's not what the vast majority of conservatives do. They just think, I don't know, complaining is going to do something, because so many are still in this mindset of, like, we're going to go back to 1994.
Yeah, but the eternal, I don't believe that, well, what they were, I mean, I agree that conservative hand-wringing is super cringe, and you always kind of hate to see the cope that comes out of these boomer constituents. But the question, well, what are we supposed to do? That's not an illegitimate question.
No, it's not. I'm just
that is an incredibly difficult question, and I'm not so sure what the answer is.
But it's a conversation that's at least worth having, as opposed to just hand-wringing, you know?
I mean, I guess at some stage, progressives are going to start choking on their own internal contradictions. But I talk to progressives a lot. I kind of jump at the opportunity, and it's absolutely depressing how they think. Their one goal in any conversation is to link any new idea to Hitler or to the KKK, and then demand that you prove that you're not Hitler or the KKK. It's the sort of like Hitler drank water logic, and it's utterly depressing. It indicates a complete failure of our education system in order our complete failure of our education system to teach independent thought. And you listen to these people who initially seem reasonable degrade into this kind of kindergarten style of thinking, and you just it feels like your soul's been torn out talking to them, as if you're not talking to a person but someone who's like literally like one of the stereotype of the NPC from a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially true if like if you try and talk about like history, or like, but so many people just like everyone imagines that, like, you know, the worst stereotypes of like the Inquisition or something, even things that are just patently not true at all. They just think that basically any period of time before 1960, life was like, you know, just The Handmaid's Tale. Like they're it's just amazing.
It's worse than that. They believe that if you have an idea and that idea is like the ones from before 1960, then you are the moral equivalent of the worst people from before 1960, and you have to prove that you're not them or in league with them. And that is a level that's beyond this thinking like, oh, I have no understanding of history or capacity to actually have an imagination that goes beyond the 20th century. It indicates a kind of moral reductionism that is infantile, and when you see it, I don't want to say I guess I should say I'm disgusted with it, but I'm just utterly disgusted with what these people have turned themselves into.
It's almost pitiful in a way.
It is very pitiful. I sound totally condescending when I say this, but it's just really, really, really depressing when people do this. You don't have to. It must be the teacher's fault. It's just bad education. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I don't know. It's or maybe it's this thing. You know, I've been looking online, and there's been this larger discussion with this concept of profilicity, where people consider authenticity. And they consider themselves to be not authentic in their actions, but what they can put on their profile. And the more I think about this reductio Hitlerum kind of argumentation, Hitler drank water type of thinking, the more I think, well, you know, this is just absolutely bananas, insane logic that a 4-year-old would be entertained by, perhaps like a very immature 4-year-old. But this is sort of the ideal thinking if you're trying to craft a social media profile. You're thinking like Hitler is social poison. The right wing is social poison. So in order for my profile to thrive, I need to make sure that I'm not friends with the wrong thinkers, right? So how do I erect a barrier around wrong things? So I'm not thinking whether this idea is right. I'm thinking, how does it impact my profile?
Like, by profile, do you mean the literal sense of like, you know, their Twitter profile, and or like also just kind of their social, how they appear to their immediate circle of friends?
Well, I mean, I really forget there's a YouTube philosopher, and I totally forget the channel name, who came up with this concept of pro-felicity. Or maybe he just read it in the literature and was talking about it. I forget, but he's an older guy and an academic, so I assume it's his original concept. But his argument was that the boundary between the social media profile and how you appear to your closest friends, especially after 2020, has virtually disappeared.
Mm-hmm. I mean, far fewer people even have real life friends. Like, I've lost a lot of my, like, I'm just desperate to like try and hang out with some of my IRL friends. It's just trying to schedule stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's insane. Do you
And
remember back in the day when boomers were like, "You spend too much time on social media," and I got a little bit of that from a relative, and I just told them like, I don't think this critique after this year is ever going to work again. If a boomer ever tells, someone who's like a millennial or a Zoomer, they spend too much time on social media, then you're going to have to explain the 2 years in their 20s when they had no social contact other than social media. And after that realization, then you can explain to them how they really need to get off social media. What were they supposed to do? Were they supposed to curl up in coffins for 2 years of their 20s when we shut down all social interaction other than social media?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other thing is it's the fact that I mean, not to like harp on boomers again, but it's just like an interesting thing I had, and it's just I'm curious what your thought on this is. Just like any new one of our biggest opponents is, I think, just trying to overcome the conservative movement, because I thought about this as a thought experiment, like, and I asked my dad this, and I love my dad, I respect him, he's a great dad, but he is a very, very emblematic of Reaganite conservatism. And I asked him, like, we have millions and millions of young Americans that are drowning in debt and unable to get out of it, and are delaying by years, if not in perpetually, being able to own a house and get married and have children. What is the Republican Party going to do for them? Or what is
And what's so ironic is this debt is generated by the most progressive institution. The party that cannot turn. I mean, essentially, American youth has been destroyed by the university system. It's loaded them up with debt and stole their most productive
And
ideas
yet the
from them.
people that are supposed to be opposed to progressives, literally the only thing they say is nothing. Like, they'll basically just laugh at and like mock young people that are drowning in debt because, oh, you just shouldn't have. It's like the same generation that just screamed everyone should go to college as now making fun of people that went to college and flooded the market with not enough skills to get a job. And they're like, well, we're not going to do anything to help you. The government shouldn't help you. I'm thinking, and I just say, like, okay, so no wonder, young people are flocking to the progressives, because even though progressives, it's their fault for doing this, at least Democrat talking points are still like, I guess, although they're on the periphery, they are like saying canceling student debt, even though Joe Biden's not going to do that. Like, if the Republican Party, literally all they're going to say is, a big middle finger to you when you're drowning in debt and can't get a family, like, how are you supposed to react?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is the thing that's dooming the Republican Party, but it's definitely probably in the top, it's in the top 3 or 4 issues that are destroying the classic Republican Party. Oh, by the way, guys, I think I have entropy up. Maybe I don't actually. I guess I do, but I don't know. I don't usually. If anyone wants to, I guess I technically donate the entropy proceeds to charity at this stage. But so this is a strictly not-for-profit channel. From as of 3 or 4 months ago, I decided to just completely say, look, I'm not going to make money out of this ever. So it's better for this whole thing to be completely not-for-profit at all. So if you want to send us questions or anything, did you have some direction you wanted to take this? Do you want to focus on Republicans or sort of the failures of Biden, or talk more about like literature?
I mean, I wanted to kind of talk about culture, because again, like literature and stuff like that. But I guess I mean, the way I think about it, right, is America is a house that's on fire, that's burning to the ground, and conservatives are basically saying, like on one hand, it's like, well, if we take, they're like saying if we take preventative measures, we can stop the house from catching on fire. We might be able to get the arsonist, even though when it's well and past too late. Or, and like if they even recognize that the house is burning down, they want to take the Constitution with them as the thing that they save, i.e., like a structural pillar, which may be well and good when the house is completely functional and sound, but like when it's burning to the ground, you don't take it with you. You take like the family, and like if you take like family portraits or things that are of actual value, like grandma's antique vase. And it's like a video title I'd want to make is like how Call of Cthulhu is more American than the Constitution, because like you think about this, is that like because so many conservatives just tie their it's very sad as them thinking like American culture is something that is inherently political, wherein if, say, Germany, right, if their culture is supposed to be defined based on what their constitution says, it's going to look radically different over the past 150 years, isn't it?
Well, they strike back with the proposition nation stuff. The issue is it's worse than trying to take a structural pillar of your house out the door when the house is burning. What you're literally trying to do when you try to save the Constitution from the destruction of America, you're trying to rescue your defective smoke alarm from a burning building. If the Constitution worked, the building wouldn't be burning down, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, the only thing we know about the Constitution is it didn't prevent this, and we're trying to save the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, again, that the propositional nation is pretty despicable. Just the more you think about it, it's like, because especially for me, where like I am descendant from the original kind of English stock that settled this country, and essentially what these people are saying is that all the culture, all the literature, Stephen Foster's music, Thomas Cole's artwork, Herman Melville's literature means absolutely nothing compared to just some political abstracts. And it's like, it's very infuriating to me.
Well, the problem is, Fritz, that, this is the thing, right? So let's say, we say goodbye to sort of the macrocosmic features of American nationalism, like the flag and Yankee Doodle and the Constitution, the stuff that we all consider cringe. And I did a video about this recently. And the thing is that once you get rid of that, not everyone defaults back to WASP New England culture. Actually, very few people do. Like 1% of the population does. And so, first of all, can that 1% of the population create some kind of cohesive community? Because now, if it can't, then you're back to the drawing board of how you create a common culture where you can actually relate to your neighbors. The thing that's keeping progressivism going right now is that there is no real feasible alternative to their version of multiculturalism. There is sort of this kind of weird civic nationalism, and the problem with civic nationalism is that anybody who's not an idiot understands that under a long enough time limit, civic nationalism becomes ethno-nationalism through the process of ethnogenesis, because the people in the country become a new ethnicity. That's what happens in countries. And the thing is that so civic nationalism is not a stable system. All nationalism is implicitly has an ethnic dimension to it, right? If only through construction via ethnogenesis, right? The people naturally interbreed and develop their own culture inside the country. So there's that. But on the other hand, there's like the civic nationalism the civic nationalists actually want is they want to have a constantly changing culture, which is like the notion of progressive multiculturalism, where we're all this sort of these deracinated last men who have no roots or no anything. And so the thing is that there doesn't seem to be any moderate position between these things that's at all feasible. And by destroying any kind of notion that people should have individual communities that have particulars to them that preserve through time, we're left implicitly with sort of this globalist notion, this neoliberal notion that no one should have any culture other than the products they consume.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I'm not saying that like, let's just, because I do kind of agree with you that like nothing would be more terrifying to the progressives than if like is if, as you said in your last video, if like imagine if Middle America or like Midwestern states, if during the next during 4th of July 2022, nobody showed out to grill or launch fireworks or go to a parade. If
Okay, yeah, no, or worse than that, right? Like, so the war in Afghanistan, we just lost that today.
Yeah.
What percentage of, like, let's do a demographic breakdown of the blood we spent there. 85% white Republican American. That's who died in this war.
Mm-hmm.
For what? For oil interests that come from New York?
For cheap heroin. I
Yeah,
guess.
for ideals that come out of Boston universities. You know, for cheap heroin. Yeah, exactly. Who knows, right? But Red America spent their blood in Afghanistan for interests that largely resided inside urban areas and inside large multinational
institutions that absolutely despise them
and who despise them. I mean, and you know, we're supposed to, and you know, and people are just like, oh well, you know, as long as it's patriotic, they'll put up with this. I don't know, something's got to change.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I guess one of the other silver lining, or I mean, something that I think they also a lot of Red America has to understand is that neocons are just insane. Like a lot of these people are they're completely insane. The ones that are like, we need to like go back to Afghanistan, or we should never have left. Like the genuinely think staying there for another 20, 40, 60
years. The Jennifer Rubins who are like, now we need to go back and spend our military resources to make sure whites can't rule in America because they're all, you know, like blah, 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 right?
Because they want it, they're thinking America's going to be South Africa now. And it's like, okay.
Well, I mean, that's a good question, is it? Because I'm assured by my progressive friends that, you know, thinking that any kind of South American or African situation could arise in a modern country, that's just lunacy. That can never happen here. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that we're that different from Brazil or from South Africa.
Especially
I think
considering
we're very similar.
In so many ways, we're really not a modern country in so many ways when it comes to infrastructure, or like we're having the brain drain, right? Where like there was an article.
Don't worry about infrastructure, Fritz, because the Democrats are infrastructuring up trillions of dollars right now. They can't get enough of it.
Are they going to paint? Is this just going to go to painting the highways rainbow colors? Is this what the money's going to go to?
I don't know, but you know, you can call anything. There's a lot of infrastructure, right? There's a lot of money that can be put into infrastructure.
We need to building up a senator's driveway. You know, that's infrastructure.
Oh, I think you're thinking about this in a way to, if it was just building up senators' driveways and if it was just a slush fund for the ruling class, that would be one thing. I think this is more of a nefarious power grab. I don't know how much I can get away with saying on YouTube, but this is
sure.
There's a lot of stuff that's a little sketch in this whole thing. But I guess the thing is at this stage, it's very apparent, and this is what Americans need to internalize. America is a one-party system, basically. The Republicans and the Democrats are not equal players in this game.
That go back and forth, like the whole pendulum idea that, oh, well, we're just, you know, it always goes back and forth. No, it just continuously swings left and then sometimes swings left a little slower.
The Republicans are the minority party, period. They are the permanent minority party. They are the outer party. They do not have power like the Democrats do.
No.
And I think that the more that the right wing understands this and realizes that they need to play inside this reality, I'm not so sure this is going to solve the problems, but at least we'll be interfacing with reality in a way that slightly makes sense.
You're right. You have to actually acknowledge a problem. You know, there's the edge. You have to acknowledge the problem first before you can begin to solve it. And it's like the Republicans keep thinking like, well, you know, everything is flooded, but if we can just patch up some of these leaks, everything's going to be fine. I mean, this is kind of why, again, relating this to literature, it's just like, and like my idea that, you know, people like Charlie Kirk are just so unbelievably boring. Is just like any movement that's at least fun or interesting in any kind of way is going to be at least can't be worse than what the conservative movement is.
Yeah, again, I guess the eternal question is, to what degree is there a structural barrier to this? Or to what degree is this a product of the fact that, people like Republicans are just boomer idiots? And to what extent is this the case because you just can't do this kind of thing? Right? Like you just can't. There are no right wing there are no right wing large corporations. There are right wing corporations because their founders are right wing. That's how they get.
And as soon as they're gone, then
so the reason why is because HR departments are basically a common. First of all, they're legally necessary, and they act as a functional political commissariat that drags the political platform of that company to the left insofar as the culture war is concerned, which is the primary determiner of who rules America. I don't know what is this. What is this? There's not a way that the Republicans can create their own right wing version of that.
Mm-hmm.
The left wing version of that's written into law, and it's not because Charlie Kirk's an idiot that's happening. It's because that's just how our legal system and our corporate system works.
Yeah, and again, it's just trying to figure out where to start, or what are acknowledging what the reality is, and then like what steps are we able to take? What can we do? Essentially, that's the biggest question, I guess, for people on the right.
I think the other issue is that I think that the only way to do something is to be kind of radically independent. That's the only way. And it's hard because you can't make any money off this stuff, right? You start a family, and right wingers like starting families, and so you start a family, and all of a sudden, a big political liability for your career doesn't seem like the smartest thing to participate in.
The other thing is, it's even more fundamental than that, is because you have tons of people and you're saying start a family. Well, it's like, how hard that is for so many people now, of no fault of their own. The fact that the social system has left so much of our generation socially awkward and unable to actually make that connection, destroyed by pornography, and like, again, and just the
online dating hasn't helped either. That's another big problem.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, you want right wingers to start a family, help them figure out some social skills, but and then
and that's another problem is you're like, how would a right wing movement help young men find social skills?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would love to, right? But that question itself is really difficult. Like,
Yeah, but I'm saying is like, just the people that just say we'll start a family. I mean, that's much easier said than done. And it's the same thing of like, I mean, one of the reasons why I don't like the idea of the Benedict option of saying, well, we're just going to become, have these independent communities. Well, how long until the progressive establishment just says, well, you guys are not, educating your kids well enough, so we're just going to send the FBI in and start shooting you, and then we'll flood, your small trad community with, Afghan refugees.
Yeah, I mean, I would if you'd asked that when we were blogging in 2016, I would have said 20 or 30 years. Now I'm thinking like 5.
Yeah.
I mean, right? And you already see prefigurations of this very distinctly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Ruby Ridge was kind of an example of that, but
I'm talking about like way more. I mean, Ruby Ridge, people were doing some. I mean, they were testing the boundaries of this, and I'm not saying that what the federal government did was at all right, but we're seeing, for instance, I talk to a lot of left-wingers, and what I always try to get from them is, to what extent are you happy to live with separatists? So, we have right-wing values. We want to create a right-wing community. Are you going to disrupt that? Over the course of the last 3 years, it's gone from almost all progressives saying, yeah, if that's what you really wanted, I'd endorse that, to almost all of them uniformly saying, no, we need to crush any kind of community that's a separatist community because it's not inclusive. They always use that word, not inclusive.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, if they could get away with it, they would probably start demonizing. I mean, don't they already hate the Amish?
I imagine that they'll try to close that loophole. It's
I guess the problem is just that ever
the
present
optics are terrible, you
because
know.
everyone has a positive view of the Amish, right? Of being the pacifists that live in the 17th century. So it's like no one's gonna want to like just send the feds in and start shooting them.
Yeah, I mean, there's. I say that they're ready to do this in a political sense, and things are accelerating. It is. Maybe I should take a step back and partially walk that back. It does appear optically very difficult to do. There do appear to be some kind of barriers that they're not comfortable crossing.
The thing is, though, when it comes to like, oh, these things would not be optically sound, it's becoming increasingly like my thought of like, yes, but like, what opposition to these things are there that could be effectual in any capacity? Like, in so many ways, the government can basically do whatever it wants. Like, as we saw in the past year and a half, they basically suspended most people's civil liberties, and absolutely sweet fa was done to stop this outside of like I guess Florida and Texas, but still like you don't really have to worry so much about optics once there's nobody that's actually going to like say, hey, those optics are bad, we're opposed to you.
Yeah, the corona, well, the last 2 years of lockdowns, they really call the bluff on the whole civic libertarian, red state, government doesn't tell me what to do type people. They called that bluff hard, and nothing happened.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a good question: what can the government get away with? I don't know what it can't get away with at this stage.
It almost
I
seems
understand that, like, obviously, if you're a leftist client class, the government can't get away with anything, mainly due to legal threat. But outside of the progressive client classes, I don't know what just general government power. It's hard to see what they can get away with.
It's almost like the only it's I guess to go back to use like the Roman Empire metaphor, towards its end, like they were getting pretty dictatorial, and a lot of people were just starting to flee to the Germanic warlords just because they were taxing them less. And it just almost seems like the only way the government power will actually get restricted is if or when some other force, some other institutions start showing how the emperor has no clothes. I mean, Afghanistan was an explicit example of this, right? Where
it does seem that might be a hopeful.
It's so kind of sad.
It's helpful in the sense that, like, the fall of Afghanistan, because this indicates that internationally the U.S. has become an unreliable partner in a way that Russia and China aren't. And this means necessarily that there's going to have to be alternatives, because there's just whole swaths of the world that have to be governed outside of the umbrella of the State Department.
I think is increasingly the State Department and the U.S. military are rapidly showing that they are paper tigers in a lot. I mean,
it's funny because they're rapidly showing that they're the same people. Because it used to be that the State Department and the military were sort of culturally different fixtures. They kind of like, one came from Blue America and one came from Red America. But now it appears that they're both pretty much the same thing. And that war has been definitively won by the State Department team.
Yeah, and again, just you don't have to look any further than what the generals have been saying. And like I came up with the term McMilitary for a reason. I mean, it's a definitive answer to like the kind of, I guess it is an answer to the idea of progressives that mock conservatives, saying, what do you think you and your AR-15 are going to do against the U.S. government? Well, it's like, or against the U.S. military, but it's like, the U.S. military is increasingly showing itself to be an ineffective organization, because if generals are more interested in, reading Karl Marx or Robin DiAngelo to their officer corps. It doesn't really matter how well it's equipped. If you have a terribly organized military, it's not going to go well. Especially if like the actual good. I'm sure this may have happened already, but like the non-woke and effective officers, have they like already, or are they close to, on the verge of just being purged out of the military and just being replaced?
I don't know. I've heard of people quitting, but I don't know if that's acute or if that's a trend. Certainly, there appears to be a problem. I mean, this is the thing I'm a little bit more aware of because I live in blue areas. I've always lived in blue areas. Certainly in blue urban areas, we're having a huge problem recruiting police officers. And it strikes me that that's a similar. It wouldn't surprise me if there's a similar trend going on in the military. But the military is a different beast, right? And so I also wouldn't be surprised if you told me that trend is not happening in the military.
Or the officers are kind of just swinging to the left.
Well, yeah, because that's where the career advancement is, right?
Yeah.
And officers, this is a career position. I don't know. This is one of these questions. It's very apparent the Democrats are paranoid about fighting some kind of insurgency coming from the United States, and we can't talk about this, so I have to truncate the discussion.
Yeah,
but I'll just say that if you're interested in this development, I encourage everyone here to look up Glenn Greenwald, who, during the Bush administration, I thought was kind of a shitlib, but has really shown himself to be a world-class journalist when it's come to this telling the truth about what's going on inside the security apparatus. He's done yeoman's work in exposing a lot of how it looks like the security apparatus is considering its future. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. But I know it's just this might be a bit of whiplash, but just kind of another thing I want to talk about in regards to culture is the fact that, like, it's not for Americans, it's not even just kind of the classic Gothic and then I guess cosmic horror of Poe and the Lovecraft, but it's like there. I think we both agree there's a lot of classic mid-20th century. And also kind of pulp science fiction that seems to actually be almost explicitly right-wing when you just look a little deeper into it. And
most science fiction was right-wing until very recently.
Which is funny is because what's becoming interesting is seeing how the Star Trek vision of gay space communism is far more of a fantasy now. And it's like something I was kind of going into because speaking on culture, because I know your wife, which a happy belated birthday to her.
Thank you.
She's kind of gotten into Warhammer 40K, right?
Well, I guess I have, and then she has just because she's kind of married to me.
I've kind of gotten into it too. A big fan of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but a video idea I had was just kind of just a thought of how the Imperium of Man is actually less dystopian and nightmarish than the Federation is, especially if you're a conservative. Because if you look at it's fascinating.
Doesn't the Federation literally exist in Warhammer in the Tau Empire? You're like the Federation. Way, I guess like the Federation meets the Dominion or something like that.
But the thing is, like I pointed this out, right? Is that Argent Templar has a lot of really good videos on Star Wars, and a good point he made is like how the Galactic Empire is very emblematic of fascism in terms of its aesthetic of brutal minimalism. And it's interesting, like you look at a galaxy class like the Starship Enterprise looks a lot more like an Imperial Star Destroyer than it does like an Imperial battleship in 40K, which is like a Gothic cathedral on top of a spaceship. Whereas like the Enterprise and a Star Destroyer are both like stark gray simplistic shapes. And
I guess well, kind of yes and no. I might disagree with that slightly because the Enterprise, the Star Destroyers are literally like World War II battleships in space. So they definitely call back to like an earlier thing, whereas the Enterprise is literally sort of this modernist architectural project with no discernible shape. it literally looks like the library from UCSD, UC San Diego, or something like that, where it's just like this jutting architectural thing that makes absolutely no aerodynamic sense whatsoever.
And then like I think there's the fact Ben McLean made this point that like they say, well, they officially say Starfleet isn't a military force, even though it really is. And
Yeah.
It's another thing is like you look at the civilian whenever they show civilians in Star Trek. First off, like all of their clothing is absolutely hideous. Like
Yeah, it's like pastel Stalinist stuff. You like North Korean type.
you think it's like it's either that or like just disgusting rags. And like what's fascinating is like anytime you look at just the average civvy in Star Trek, they just seem like they're complete brain dead idiots who like, you know, that they're like the people that want communism to happen and think it's going to let them just be, you know, play video games all day and not actually have to work. I guess it's more like that movie Demolition Man, right? Where everybody is so like, everyone is such sheep and is incapable of like, if any reasonable threat, if say like the Romulans or the Cardassians like kind of got their shit together and actually said, we're going to present a real threat to the Federation and start invading planets, how on earth could Starfleet like even begin to try and explain to like the settlers on a planet, like, we're gonna have to start training you in military matters, and we're gonna start restraining, you know, your rations or something like that. Like they just see. And another thing is that like you almost think that the only people that actually seem to follow the Prime Directive or weigh any of these ethical issues they always happen to just be the people on the bridge of the Enterprise. Like I never got the idea that anybody else in Starfleet really cares about these moral issues.
Yeah, civilians are kind of moved around like pawns. Although, you know, I think this is something that's pretty radically underdeveloped in almost all of these universes. I was talking to somebody who's into the modeling about, okay, like let's say you wanted to have civilians in a Warhammer 40K diorama. How would you model them? Because there's no indication in any of the literature or anything or any art that depicts what they would look like or anything. In some ways, you'd have an easier time imagining a Star Trek civilian than you would a Warhammer one. I guess you'd imagine them dressing like medieval peasants, but with like.
I mean, it depends widely on the planet they're on, because like, you know, you have feudal worlds, but that are basically just the Middle Ages. But then like if they're on a hive world or something, or if they're particularly well off or something like that, I guess it could be just kind of like poor urban clothing. But at the same time, like you can say what you want, but like my point would be it's like what does Captain Picard believe in? What do any aspiring Starfleet officers or any civilians in Star Trek, like, what is their belief? Do they like, is it just like pure? It also seems like
No, like, go ahead.
If I guess like I've seen things like in the new Star Trek Picard series, I guess like poverty exists now. Like you have stratification of wealth again for some reason. But like in I guess classic Star Trek, the idea is like everyone is paid equally, or so it's like what drives someone to become a Starfleet captain other than just sheer, you know, wanting power, which you're just going to get a bunch of sociopaths. You're not going to get a nice gentleman like Captain Picard.
Well, I'd say that I never had a hard time figuring out what Captain Picard believed in. That's actually the easy part, because I think it's clear what he believes in.
Sure.
The bigger problem is how a society like Star Trek produced him, because he does not feel like Captain Picard does not feel like he comes from sort of an egalitarian society. He feels like he comes from an aristocratic society.
And
so I'd have an easier time believing that they fished him off some kind of feudal, you know, separatist world than that he was produced by some kind of egalitarian schooling system.
Mm-hmm. And it's you said this to me years ago. Yeah, it's like, how on earth does Star Trek universe, if the civilians in Star Trek are just such sheep that like have no ambition or any real sense of anything. Um, how does that produce, like, respectable officers?
Well, these heroes, right? These are larger than life heroes that you see coming out of these places, like Kirk and Picard. They feel like these people from the old world that are just like these sort of like greatest generation type figures.
And
the men that you'd follow to the end of the earth, right?
And that, yeah, it's because like
That's what they are.
This isn't just to like rag on Star Trek, because I actually quite like it, because the vast majority of it is just kind of fun, well written, science fiction stories. But at the same time, bringing that up, isn't that very applicable to today? Like, has there been any like on a high officer scale in, say, the war in Afghanistan, who are like the heroic generals? Who where is the Patton? Where is the Montgomery? Like all I've heard is like, oh, like this general was involved in a sex scandal, or this one, horribly mismanaged this, this.
Well, these wars aren't conventional military campaigns; they're management problems,
Mm-hmm.
and they're issues of will. So I don't think they're really amenable to anything like that.
But still, like, do you really see any great men and women being produced by our society today?
No, and this is something that I remember. This is something that Endeavor harped on, and he was really right to harp on this. Is that I think it was about 2 or 3 years back, maybe more like 2. Time's running together these days.
Mm-hmm.
2019, I'm pretty sure. The United States like drone striked or orchestrated the assassination of a prominent Iranian military.
Oh, that was early 2020.
Oh, it was early 2020.
Yeah,
oh, really?
It was like at the very first days of 2020, and people thought we're going to go to war in Iran now.
God, wow, how times have changed.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the Iranian media, they had this amazing rejoinder where they asked a simple question. So how do we kill the equivalent of this general in America? Who would we kill that would really shatter the American psyche? Are we supposed to drone strike SpongeBob? Or just assassinate Spider-Man? And you just realize that there are all of our heroes are fictional elements of a time that no longer exists. We don't have any trust or any concept of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of brings me to, because like one of my favorite periods of history has always been kind of the dynastic and politics of the dynastic side, and kind of the diplomacy and politics of kind of the imperial age of the mid to late 19th century to World War I. And like I'm rewatching my favorite TV series is Fall of Eagles, which is a 1970s BBC series that kind of depicts kind of the height and then fall of the Habsburgs, Romanovs, and Hohenzollerns. And like, despite the fact that, of course, like, and watching it is, you realize like this is like, not only is this the kind of romanticism of this age something that's lost, but it's like, even politically, it seems like this is the last age in which actual humans seem to be in charge of countries. Flawed as they were, it actually felt like the Kaiser, the Tsar, they seem like people you could actually interact with, and like they're portrayed as opposed to, I guess, like, the modern rule by bureaucrats and committees and technocrats. And they kind of embody this in terms in the character of Lenin, who's played by, speaking of Star Trek, Sir Patrick Stewart, who his portrayal, his portrayal of Lenin makes Captain Picard seemed like a warm, friendly grandma. Like he's so played as so cold and diplomatic and unfeeling.
So wait, was this before Star Trek?
Yeah, this was the 1970s.
Oh, okay. Wow. So this was because Patrick Stewart. I don't know if this is famous or not, but I remember him playing Sejanus Macro from I, Claudius, who was sort of a notorious rake from the reign of Tiberius. And he was just like this total sociopath, and Patrick Stewart played him well. And I was just thinking, I could really imagine his career going in more of like a serial killer sociopath direction if he hadn't become Captain Picard from Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. And well, he did play, he played Lenin, and like again, I recommend the show to anybody. It's the fact, and like the thing is, watching it though, it's very hard watching it because it's so depressing. It's like watching a funeral march, or you're seeing people that are going to be in a horrible car crash having fun at the party right beforehand. Like you're seeing, like there's a moment where when Tsar Nicholas is going to get married to Princess Alexandra of Hesse-Darmstadt, I think, and like they're all in Coburg for a wedding, and he's with Kaiser Wilhelm, who's just like, he's helped talk to her, kind of talk her into marrying him. And he's like, all right, Nikki, go in there and ask her to marry you. And he like just picks up some like flowers from a vase and gives it to Nikki. And Nikki's just kind of like awkward and confused. And it's like, it's such a kind of sweet, funny moment. And, they always refer to each other as Nikki and Willie. And then you realize like what's going to happen to these people is Wilhelm is going to go into exile and be known at that time as the most hated human being on the planet because of all the Allied propaganda, and so many people wanted him dead. And he's the one that gets off the best because Tsar Nicholas has him and his entire family shot in a basement by communists.
Mm.
But the point of the show is it's a very interesting portrayal because it never like kind of rubs in the face of, oh, like these, if only they had just become liberal democracies. It just kind of shows like even these people who were friends with each other, if Kaiser Wilhelm and Tsar Nicholas, if they couldn't prevent war from happening, like how could like a cold calculating bureaucrat not go to war? But they were the ones that were in charge, and that's kind of where this, dynastic autocracies were the scapegoat for it. But show, people asking in chat, the show is called Fall of Eagles. You can find it all on YouTube, actually.
Yeah, and I really love these historical dramas. I guess I'm very concerned, though, that after this decline happens, we're just going to descend into some kind of weird nostalgic depression as a culture, where we're constantly hearkening back to things. The issue is that it seems that although the right has a certain kind of authenticity that the left can't replicate, and seems very difficult for the left to replicate, the reason why the left wins is it seems like it owns the future.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is that I guess this is where the left is running into problems, is that they're increasingly showing, like, people are increasingly, like, seeing that the left is not able to deliver on that future. Like, even if they get everything of, like, reparations and stuff, it's not going to actually fix long-term problems.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But I don't know. This is the open question. And
like, like, I get what you're talking about, though. It's like in the Fallout series of games, there's like a concept called Old World Blues, right? Where the setting is, in a post-nuclear apocalypse, and so many people are still just very nostalgic of the world from 200 years prior. And I guess part of it is like, then there's the idea of people need to move on and have some form of hope for the future. And I think that's kind of what, even though I guess neo-reactionary, but we also kind of have to be futurists in some way. We have to actually show people hope that we can provide a better future where people will be happy. And then
I'm sorry, were you done?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, this is interesting you mentioned Fallout, because that was, I sort of stopped playing video games, or AAA video games, at least in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I played with Fallout New Vegas. And the thing is, and I kind of like this about the game, I was critical of this game for a lot of other reasons. I felt it should have had a deeper plot. But from the advertising and from the stuff you get on the package, you expect this organization called the Brotherhood of Steel. They all look like Space Marines from 40K. You expect that they're going to be the heroes. They're going to be the people who come in and save everyone from this post-apocalyptic setting. But what's interesting about the approach of Fallout is that I think in both of the games, but certainly in New Vegas, the Brotherhood of Steel is portrayed as fundamentally backward-looking, flawed nostalgists who are kind of LARPing as humanity's saviors, but are really just kind of whistling past the graveyard.
Well, meanwhile, you have or sorry, were you?
No, it's done. Go ahead. It's
Yeah,
straightforward conversation.
Meanwhile, the people that are building the future is you basically either have, you know, guys LARPing as Roman legionaries, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, they basically act more like, you know, ISIS. They're more close to that in terms of their actions. You have people that are basically desperately trying to recreate democracy, and then you have like some, you know, undying technocrat and Mr. House. And what's funny is about the Brotherhood of Steel, because this is one of the big criticisms people have of how, because Bethesda did not develop Fallout New Vegas, Obsidian did. They developed Fallout 3 and 4 and 76, and the problem is that in 3 and 4, the Brotherhood of Steel basically are portrayed as these saviors, and like anything that's actually interesting about the Brotherhood is just completely gone. And it's just, we want you to be able to LARP as a space marine in post-apocalyptic nuclear America. Like,
well, it felt that's what felt real to me about New Vegas. And people say that Mr. House, I don't know if they oftentimes call him the Nick Landian ending for Fallout New Vegas, where you essentially put humanity in the hands of some kind of Rogos basilisk and hope for the best.
You put humanity in the hands of Andrew Ryan.
Yeah, I guess so, or whatever is left of him, right? And so I don't know. I mean, this is this is a good question. Obviously in New Vegas, it's kind of cheating because the game is pushing you in the direction of the sort of neoliberal option. They give you this neoliberal technocratic faction, and then they give you a huge push that that's basically the right answer. And I don't know. That's fair enough.
I mean, what I tended to go for though is like the fourth option, where you basically say, I don't want any of these people, and I guess you can just kind of LARP and say you're creating any type of government you want. And in a way, what's funny is that there's one of the best missions in quests in the game. I think is you if you're aware of what the Enclave are from the earlier games, and I guess Fallout 3 is, they were like the actual remnant of the US government that basically just turned into a fascist state. They're basically like what, like, liberals warned what George Bush and like the worst kind of military industrial complex,
they're basically like Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney.
Yeah, which is funny because the actual president, the last president's name was Dick Richardson. But what's funny is like there's a remnant of them in Fallout New Vegas, like, and they're just a bunch of like pensioners that are just retired across the wasteland, and you can kind of recruit them all for one last mission at the end of the game. And they're kind of portrayed as a little and like you get, of course, their power armor, and it's just like it lets you have some fun with the Enclave because they also exist in 3, and I think they're kind of, even though they're the bad guys, they're probably objectively.
I seem to remember them beating the villains, right?
They are portrayed as the villains, but it's kind of like how, but like I think objectively they actually would have been better running the wasteland than the Brotherhood of Steel because of resources. But yeah. Anyways, like Fallout New Vegas, like has I brought that up just because there is that idea of old world blues, right? The idea that we're just in this kind of sulking in the now and being just focused on reminiscing on everything that was lost, which we have to acknowledge that our civilization was lost, but then you have to kind of move on. You have to have St. Augustine talking about the city of God. You have to have the people building you have to have the Clovis and the Pope Leo and the people recognizing we have to build up a new civilization. Although even then, and the thing is, even with that, there's still for centuries, even up to now, you could say people always still have this nostalgia for the Roman Empire.
But but there was, I think that came back later. I don't think that Charlemagne, for instance, was particularly a Roman Empire nostalgist. In fact, I think what kind of distinguished him was that he was the first person that seemed to be kind of not doing that. You know what I mean?
Well, I think he understood like the trappings of like the legitimacy that could come from being crowned emperor, but certainly his, the Frankish Empire did not resemble the Roman Empire. Like the Holy Roman Empire was, as much as like, the use of Latin and all that, and the ego, it's not like they're not just trying to go around as like wearing Roman clothing, or they're not gonna, try and be Roman Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. This is sort of because I think that it's very clear that the populist right, at least in its current incarnation, can't unseat their opponents. And so until something else comes along, a lot of us here are kind of weird types of cultural free agents where we don't see a solution in the system at all. And the system is sort of constitutionally demanding, or it's constitutionally incapable of allowing the necessary reforms into it.
We're kind of like cultural nomads. Like we can't settle. It seems like we have, our values, we have our beliefs, but like we can't really settle down and find a place in our culture because a lot of it's just designed. It's because like, it's like trying to mix you can mix a conservative Christian culture with a, sex addicted secular one. It's in the same way you can't mix a nomadic culture with a settled one. Like.
Well, yeah, I think our culture has not historically. I mean, I don't know, for Americans maybe it's different, but I think a lot of Europeans, the nomadic elements of culture, that's a very far away piece, and so much of their culture is about being grounded in land and soil and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double meat. I mean, the point being is that we can't really find a place to settle in the culture.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, that's the predominant one. I was kind of using the example that, it's like mixing oil and water in terms of why we can't settle in the culture, because that in order to do that, we would have to actually give up our beliefs and values.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big challenge for a lot of people. I've talked about this. The last person I talked about this with was the Franklin. And I think everyone's sort of in the same place where we're trying to fumble around for something that looks like a solution. And no one really has. Yeah,
we're climbing a mountain. We're climbing a mountain. We're trying to find a ledge to hang on to.
Yeah, I can see that analogy. I'm just trying to figure out, and because the Biden administration is its degeneracy is just metastasizing before our very eyes. What was the actual gap between us leaving and the Taliban taking Kabul? It felt like less than a week.
Yeah.
Was that correct? Was it less than a week?
Pretty much. I mean, we still actually have some troops. We actually still have troops there. We have thousands there, and they still just managed to, completely overrun the country. And you know who's gonna what I find fascinating though is it's like the idea that this proves beyond all shadow of a doubt that the idea of the American hegemony is completely gone. And what's interesting is we live in an era, like a multipolar world, where you have like the four dominant things is the EU, the US, Russia, and China. And it seems like all four of them, the US and are kind of degrading, whether it looks like it or not. Like Russia has massive social and economic problems. China is going to have massive economic problems. Socially, the United States and the EU are completely unraveling. And so it's like you have like four major great powers, but all four of them are like not long for the world, it seems.
Yeah, this is just I yes and no. I mean, this is the weird thing, right? Because the United States is undergoing some kind of disintegration, but its global reach and its hegemony in many ways have never been more powerful. It essentially dictates the cultural policy in all countries at all times through its global corporations. its university system is the only birthplace of new ideas that have any chance of being politically realized.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is sort of the weird space we find ourselves in, where it appears that things are going downhill, but it's also totally impossible to imagine it ending.
But again, like, I even then, I guess I'm optimistic in a sense that the university system, we agree these things can't go on, but they can drag on their own deaths. They can drag this out for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, they could. I mean, who knows? Maybe they could drag it on for a century. A century of this would be sufficient to basically burn off virtually all connection we have to the old America. By 100 years of this, by 100 years of post-Great Awakening religious fervor, all the statues will be smashed. All of the connections America has to the old racist bad order will be destroyed, as they will be in all other countries that are American satellites, which are virtually all other countries. And then the American university system collapses and is replaced by what? I mean, I think I've come to believe that things collapse when there's a body ready to replace them, but there is no body ready to replace this thing.
And that's the great question, right? Because, like, you've said, when I watched your thing with the Franklin, right, it's the people that are ruling us are so weak. They are so both physically and just mentally weak people that it seems like a gentle push could topple them, but you need somebody to push them, and the whole system is set up to prevent somebody from getting at them. And I guess that's the thing, is trying to build up something that's both clear enough as signaling that it's a opposition to the left, to progressivism, but also robust enough that it can sustain attacks from it. And I think that's the trick, right? Is they have so many ways of just censoring and silencing people, but I think something can be done. Something a war. A German general, Erich von Manstein, said, "A war is not over till you consider it. A war isn't lost till you consider it lost." Right. So long as there's hope, there's life.
Mm-hmm. So far, most of the neo-reactionary solutions. This is not my only critique of neo-reaction, but it's certainly one that I think we should talk about more. They're both from Nick Land and from Mencius Mollberg and from half of the other people that are from the old school NRX. Their solution essentially has been to replace the Brahmin and Kshatriya class or warrior class with the institutions we built in the merchant class. Basically, the managerial and administrative classes of Silicon Valley corporations. That's essentially what Nick Land talked about. That's essentially what Yarvin harps on. I just think that this is, I mean, their other work aside, I think that this idea is a complete non-starter. I don't think that constitutionally these bodies are capable of doing the kind of thing you need to do to rule. And so I think that this is a trap we've fallen into, and we just need to think of something that's different.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get something from the ground up, right? Of trying to start institutions, especially, again, and I agree with you. As much as the conversations online are useful, any real movement has to be in person. But
any rumor has to be in person. Pardon me, I didn't interrupt you. Go ahead.
I mean, what I was going to say though is like, the thing is, like, creating one. I'm not so sure it should be creating one singular kind of, we are the NRX party, as it is trying to come up with creating different institutions that are able to outlast progressivism and supplant it once they're strong enough. And
that's hard because and I didn't interrupt you, but that's hard because progressives thrive on destroying non-progressive institutions. That's what they like doing the most.
Mm-hmm.
The second you stand up and go, like, I am a right-wing institution, they just descend upon you with as much vitriol as they can possibly imagine.
Yeah, and again, that's what I said earlier, is how do you get something that's kind of a clear enough signal to, say, the boomer cons or conservatives, to signal this is, if you hold conservative views, abandon the Republican Party and join us. How do you get it to be clear enough for that, but also not clear enough that that the progressives can instantly destroy it?
I just think that this is impossible. I'm going to play out say that there's not going to be a party that goes like, oh hey Al, you conservatives, ignore the Republican Party and come over to us. If you say that loud enough, then every single institution is just going to line up their sights and obliterate you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that arises that replaces the right wing has to not look like that, I guess. That's all I can really say.
Yeah, it can't be a political party.
Yeah, and it certainly can't make overtures to Republicans going like, oh, hey, guys, we're the new right wing, except we're not going to play by the old rules, because that's exactly what they're looking for. That's exactly what they're looking for.
The left is?
Yeah. All the left organizations like the ADL and well, increasingly and ironically, the American Civil Liberties Union, they go around looking for right-wing political organizations that are off the Republican reservation and trying to destroy them. That's their number one MO. That's the food they eat.
It has to be organizations that are not explicitly political, but implicitly reactionary.
And that's very, very difficult.
But
the reason why it's difficult. I'm trying. We're missing some kind of piece here, and that's what I really want to emphasize. Because if you're not explicitly right in some way, then you are going to get dragged to the left by your HR department.
Mm-hmm.
Necessarily, and even if you don't have an HR department, there's the sort of the entropy of political degeneration swings you to the left. That's usually a much slower process, but still it's there. So I don't know, right? I don't know where the organization could come from. At least right now. Maybe progressivism has to burn itself out or something. Is that possible?
I mean, it could. I mean, it's hard to see because things are becoming very unpredictable. It's like again, so recently, could you have imagined that people didn't think that enough people would seriously doubt legitimacies of elections? I don't know if I'm allowed to just say that, but or people are going to have a virus that just becomes a very clear power grab to the 18th degree, or that people are going to occupy the Capitol building out of rejection of an election result. Who knows what can happen?
I would say 2 of the 3 of the things you mentioned, ironically, is very common. I think the one thing that's never happened before is the mass lockdown. Yeah. I'd say the other 2 things have happened actually very frequently in American history, or at least as far as I can tell, they have. Obviously, I'm just speaking as a layperson here.
I suppose, but I guess there could be a hope that with the Great Awakening, they just burn themselves too fast that enough people just become dejected from it. Though the problem with it is that they're so kind of scary in terms of showing how much power they can wield that moderates are kind of cowed into going along with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the eternal question. We don't know. This is just a really tough question. This is probably what people want to ask me the most, and I'm not so sure what the solution is. I do get the sense that building ethnic and religious communities that focus on internal elements of your culture, I do believe that's sort of ultimately the way to go. Mm-hmm. Because it has been a very historically robust way to take shelter in a very hostile political environment.
And I guess the kind of nicely, because I kind of have to get going. I have an early shift at my job tomorrow, but I is that kind of nicely bring us back to kind of the start of this of, you know, like if people are conservative and still have these, if they can at least start appreciating, like, you know, oh, instead of just like worship of the Constitution, if people want to, like, instead of waving around the American flag and the Constitution, and it's like, if you can at least try and give them something to grab onto that is like distinctly part of their culture, like Lovecraft, Poe, and Melville, is at least something that they can grab onto and like is actually robust because it's not political. Like, and as I said, you know, Moby Dick is going to outlast the United States. H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu is going to outlive the United States.
I think you're right about that. I don't even know necessarily it has to be so American. I think a general great books type of a great books appreciation society, those things in the abstract are a threat. They are a threat in the sense, not in the sense that they will actually create any kind of political activism the way that progressives would usually think about it, but a threat in that they promise a world beyond what we're currently offered. And they implicitly, by the nature of the books they study, criticize the nature of the world as it exists today. And yeah, I think that is implicitly.
And in a way, it's something unlike the progressives, like they've brilliantly used the Constitution to their own advantage. They used legal systems. They used the American flag to their own institutions. But as kind of I've indicated, that especially with the Great Awakening, like they can't have, like, Lovecraft is just like it's like Lambus bread is to Gollum. It's something that like they really can't touch without burning themselves anymore because it goes against their religion. Like, you know, H.P. Lovecraft, Shakespeare, you know, that's haram. That's the forbidden culture that you're not allowed to talk about. That because that and like
I don't think it's quite there yet. I've seen way too many. I mean, I go into a local game store and like half the games are Lovecraft based. So sure. we're not there. And, you know, you talk to progressives at a university town and they all love Shakespeare. So we're not there yet. But I can definitely see what you're talking about on the horizon.
Yeah.
And I don't see why we wouldn't get there. And who knows about the time frame, because if nothing, the last week has shown us that time frame estimates are just complete crap. There's nothing stopping them from making that move where they're just like Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare, as people have said, Shakespeare basically invented racism. Without Caliban, there are no orcs. There are no subhuman mongrel races that appear in later Western fiction. So there's in some weird way, Shakespeare is one of the original vampires of our of 20th century and 19th century racism, very ironically. Eventually, things like that will become apparent to this religious cult, and they'll devour this stuff. But they know, and the reason why they don't, and this is the thing, this religious cult isn't stupid, right? I mean, like they know that if they devour some of this, I mean, I guess in some sense it is stupid, but it's not as stupid as you might think. They understand what a vital organ is, and so they're going to eat all of their non-vital organs before they chomp down on the ones that would cause them serious political harm. And they know if they taught Shakespeare and they call it racist, they toy with this every now and again. They know that they do this. They know that a huge percentage of their PMC class is going to balk and look for something different. And so they've never done this. They do this every now and again. I've seen this happen. An English department calls Shakespeare racist. A highly progressive high school calls, The Tempest racist. And, it escalates into a big deal at the locality of this super blue place. In some of these blue places I've lived, I've seen this happen. And then, it gets to a certain point. And unlike something like white privilege, where they just let this thing go wild because they like the idea, the cooler heads come in and they basically tell the activists, no, we're not going to do this.
And then they pull the smart idea, and then they pull the idea of, well, we're just gonna like we're gonna use critical theory and look at and say, actually, we can look at like queer or Marxist themes in Shakespeare.
Yeah, and they pull what's called an unprincipled exception. There's this is something that's people are coming up for words with this stuff, and they're all describing the same phenomenon. Well, two phenomena in particular. The first one is where progressives have a principle that should by any means condemn everyone, but they make exceptions for the people they like and the things they need to secure their power base. Another one is a phenomenon that you can point to in condemnation. If you point to it, a phenomenon that you can point to if you like it, you can't point to it if you don't like it. So for instance, demographic change in Europe and America. If you think it's a good thing, you can go like, oh, hey, look, it's happening, and we should love the fact that this demographic is replacing the other one. But if you mention it and don't like it, then it's a conspiracy. These things are getting names, but this is what's preventing them from canceling Shakespeare and canceling the Western canon is the fact that these organizations like the universities, they do have cooler heads. They do have people who understand consequences. And so these fires aren't let burn that hot, at least not yet.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess it goes to, can we still reclaim them whilst the left has them?
The answer to that seems to be, well, I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that we can to a certain degree, but this gets back to the whole, well, this is where we started, right? You're William F. Buckley in 1965, and you're all about symphony orchestras and all this stuff. And all the symphony orchestras are in blue metropolitan areas. We didn't use the term red versus blue in 1970, but they're there, right? And they're all composed of people who, go and vote for Dukakis and Mondale and stuff like that. And so you're this intellectual, and you can say, conservatives should be all about all this high culture stuff. Your army is not a high culture army. The thing is that the culture follows the people. And the difficulty right now is that if your army is a bunch of middle class people and lower middle class people, middle class people, and no, my family's kind of like on this cusp between middle class and upper middle class. Sorry, upper middle class. I think that's the thing. But middle class people, they'll like go see a symphony every now and again, once every year or so. It's like it's nice to have. It's part of their culture, but the majority of their culture is really defined by pop culture. And for the people who have their lives organized around high culture, they're uniformly academics. They're uniformly PMC classes. They're uniformly the people that make up the universities, not the people who work high-skilled, white-collar jobs. And so you can kind of hold these things with a middle-class base, but in order to really hold them, you need an artistic and academic class, a sort of Brahmin class. Those are the people who make this stuff. You can't hold on to these cultural elements if you're composed of the people who once every 2 years or 2 times every year go see a symphony. You only hold on to them if you're the people who run the symphony, who actually play the instruments, who actually write the music.
Yeah, and again, like I have to go soon, but
yeah, sorry about that. I'll stay by the chat. I will stay to answer the questions. So take as much time as you want, Fritz. I want to give you a chance to say your piece and all that.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of going back to kind of where I started, is that like you can't get the idea of like, how do you ask your average conservative, like you're going to ask them to write, the next Herman Melville when all they know is like NASCAR. But like, and it's kind of why I think it's, there's no harm that can come from trying to reintroduce or maybe almost kind of rehabilitate for America, at least, our cultural literary canon, to try and educate people in this culture.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I think the whole thing with Lovecraft is promising. Melville is that's an interesting way to go too, because I think that's a great book, Moby Dick, but it's also one that's very difficult to translate into our contemporary language.
Mm-hmm.
I found it very hard to explain why the book is good, especially since I think the book really comes alive in the very chapters that people most often complain about. So
I haven't actually gotten to Moby Dick to Melville yet, but like I'm excited to get to it. But
you're aware that like there's these chapters that are like long digressions about whaling and stuff like that, right?
Okay, yeah, like I can see that, but I can also see why, again, and it's kind of the idea, like if you're aware of the culture, or it's like that's kind of where you can fall in love with this, wherein if this can take you to and like get you to like see with a completely unmodern mindset, that's something that's kind of scary for progressives, because if like the way you can enjoy these works is only if you're the way you can fully enjoy this is by not looking at it through a modern lens. I think that might be scary to progressives.
Yeah, well, yes and no. And I don't want to. The thing is, you always make me want to, like go on a huge digression myself, Fritz, and I don't want to take up your time. Maybe you could just talk about your own. I mean, I know you have to go, but maybe you could talk about your own projects, what you're planning.
Sure. I guess because I said earlier, it's like kind of wanting to make this into more concise videos, like how Call of Cthulhu is more American than the Constitution, or why Star Trek is more dystopian than the Imperium of Man. Those are just kind of two ideas I had. I mean, I liked doing movie reviews, but geez, I don't know what movies are at all out right now. But I keep wanting to like try and bite the bullet and try and do a video game review just to see, what I can make of it. It's just like because playing a game just for fun and then trying to play it and recording good footage are very different things, as is streaming.
Yeah. I never really, that was never really a component of my channel, recording video game footage.
Yeah, it's just something I want to try. I mean, I guess the other thing is I might plug that I do occasionally stream on Twitch. I don't do it on a consistent schedule, but I would like to do it more. Like there's some games I think would be fun to play. But yeah, that's all I have to say. It was very nice to speak with you again. But
yeah, I think you should always think of YouTube as a place where you can put ideas, even if you have to take a break for work. I think technically I'm supposed to be on hiatus or something like that, but I think I realized at some point that I wasn't so much on hiatus. I was just this is my new life, right?
Yeah, and I found, especially now, that like being a NEET is completely soul sucking and destructive, but like having a full-time job and all that, it actually, and not monetizing the channel, because I think I might demonetize my channel as well. I get super chats occasionally if I do a stream, but geez, like I don't really know where any of that money goes. I know it goes to Google, which is not good. But
I actually disabled super chats my channel. People who want to super chat me, there is a link to Entropy, but I will donate 90% of that money after Entropy takes its cut to a charity to be determined. When they give me my payment, I will give them their payment and post the receipt on Telegram. Sorry to involve you in that, but that's
yeah, and that's good. But my point was saying is that since I don't need YouTube to get any money, like you can just you just see it as a creative hobby and a creative outlet. It makes it a lot more fun to use.
Oh yeah. And I think you should be able to just not publish a video for a year and then create a video essay. The one difficulty is that, unfortunately, because of the algorithm, that's going to hurt you in terms of the people who watch your essay. And since
it won't hurt you if you really don't care if people see the video, since you're not financially dependent on it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but I mean, to be quite honest, I like to say I don't care about the money. I do care that people actually
Sure.
consume. I'm like, I put like, writing. You can attest to this, Fritz, but like writing video essays or writing essays is actually takes longer for me than writing video essays. But I know you work differently than I do, but writing things out longhand is way longer because I don't have dyslexia, but I have a weird thing where I can't read words properly. It seems so. Proofreading takes a long time. This takes an enormous amount of time, and the one consolation I have is that people actually watch it and that they internalize the ideas and that I've advanced some kind of conversation. So even though I'm not making any money, it's not my career. If I make a video and it bombs, that does kind of cause me to take a step back, right?
Yes, yeah, you are right on that. But I guess on a last note of speaking of classic American culture, and I think you'd agree with this, is just a last recommendation is if you want something that is kind of an actual celebration of classic kind of Americana folk culture, watch the animated series Over the Garden Wall. I'm saying this to check because I know you see it and you really like it.
Oh my god, I love that. I love that. It's a series, not a movie, but it basically is a movie. We watch that movie every Halloween. We watch the movie. It's a family tradition.
And again, even especially because I was on vacation in Maine recently, like, and I kind of watched it on the way there, and like it is. I really just kind of regret not watching it in like late September and October because it is very, especially in my area where basically everything is covered in forests.
Yeah. Oh my god. You actually recommended that movie to me and turned me on to it. I need to thank you for that, Fritz, because that is such a phenomenal piece of modern culture. Do you know what the thing I associate with that is? It's groundedness. It's territorialized, right? Every character comes from a place and a time, and it's ironic because it takes place in either the 80s or 90s. I can't tell which one, but
yeah,
one of the
like
two, right?
because they're because like I think somebody like did a video where they looked at like one of the cassettes the character is using, and it's like something that's from like the early 90s, but I just like the fact that all of this is it's kind of going through all different types of American folklore. Like it's everything from kind of the Ichabod Crane early colonial era to like Louisiana steamboats on the Mississippi to like early Disney animation in one, or like Wizard of Oz in one episode.
It's great. And I think the thing is, it had to be the 90s or the 80s because it seems like any time after that would have seemed weirdly de-grounded, right? The time period where the characters come from would have seemed not part of America in the same way. I don't know how to put it into words, but there's some good instinct.
It would have been too disconnected.
Yeah, something like that, right? I don't know exactly how to put it, but it seems like that was really the last point in America where you're like, yes, the 90s are just another era in this progression of American eras.
Mm-hmm. And then, like the thing the thing that I like most about it though is the fact that it is sincere and authentic. It's the opposite of BioShock Infinite, where it says, look at this is classic American culture and this is how evil it is because racism, whereas Over the Garden Wall, it just kind of shows it, and it's as an authentic, and like the music in it is all really good.
Well, I feel like I'm outspoken about this because I feel that in BioShock Infinite, you can literally, it's so funny because BioShock Infinite came out in 2013, which was the year of the Great Awakening. Mm-hmm. And you can literally see the old perspective and the new perspective on American past duke it out in the literal text of BioShock Infinite. For instance, Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite could be a character from Over the Garden Wall. But Comstock could only be a character from the cartoonized, turbo-racist America that currently exists in progressive imagination.
Yeah, and again, you don't have that. You just kind of portray this is culture in Over the Garden Wall, and I actually got the comic of it recently. I haven't got around to reading it, but if it's more of that, because that's the only kind of sad thing is that it's almost too short. But I will take something that is too short but consistently good over something that constantly drags itself on, and people have no idea how to end it because they don't hire writers anymore.
Yeah,
But
I felt like I could have watched about twice as much Over the Garden Wall. But I think when you start pushing into that limit, you definitely start pushing into the, oh, here's the bad episode. And there's no bad episode in it currently. And as it exists currently, it's just uniformly amazing.
mm-hmm. And but like yeah, and again to end this, because we can have another conversation at some point.
Sure,
but,
whenever you want, man.
Yeah, but like I don't know, for you especially, there's a video game that I saw like that I saw somebody live stream or play recently called The Outer Wilds, and if nothing else, you should just check out the soundtrack, because it is just kind of folk music. It is like banjos and like harmonicas and stuff like that, and it seems like it should be incongruous for a game that's just about like exploring a solar system as an alien, but like it has so much kind of soul to it, and it's about like the heat death of the universe, but it's not cynical.
Wow. That's grim.
It is, but it has a very good kind of optimistic ending. I don't want to spoil, but you might want to check it out just for like the soundtrack of it, because you would probably like it.
Yeah, I like being kind of aware of video games, even though I don't have time to play them.
Mm-hmm. You know? I mean, the one I've finally gotten into, because I bit the bullet and got a PlayStation 5. I'm actually glad I got it when I did, before the prices got jacked up so much, because you can't get them anywhere. And I got it specifically to play the game Bloodborne, which is very heavily based on H.P. Lovecraft, and is this kind of cool. It's like the premise of it is you're a hunter hunting beasts in this city, this kind of Gothic Victorian city, and so it kind of starts out as a classic Gothic horror thing of like you're Van Helsing, but then it kind of reveals that the reason people are turning into beasts is because of like ancient pacts with these giant elder gods, and then it kind of goes beyond Lovecraft of you can actually do something and fight back against these incomprehensible cosmic beasts, and people really love that game, and I now know why. But yeah, I think that's about it.
So I'll stay to answer questions from the chat. Fritz, if you have to leave, I know you have an early shift, so thank you so much for joining me.
And have a blessed Feast of the Assumption.
Oh, yes. Happy Feast of the Assumption, Fritz.
All right. God bless. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks. All right. So I guess I'll use the rest of the time to answer questions from the chat. I think I can stay for a bit more time if people want to ask questions. I know there are some Entropy chats. So I haven't gotten my first collective payment from Entropy in a while. I think there's sort of a threshold system. I haven't really figured out the charity to give to. It has to be non-political in order for this concept to work. And yeah, I see that. I see that Catholic Lunch is in the chat, so that's nice. So I guess I can just do a little bit of a question and answer session. Now that Fritz is gone, I'll definitely answer the Entropy chats. But after I get the Entropy payout this next time, the lump sum that I receive will be given to a charity to be determined. If people want to recommend non-political charities, so when I mean non-political, I really draw the line at something like pro-life. I would consider pro-life to be as political as you can be without crossing the line into just explicitly political territory. So no donations to organizations that lobby the government, nothing like that. But definitely something like Catholic Relief Services or something, cystic fibrosis. That's a cause that I felt very, and I always hesitate to say it very passionately, but I've always felt that disease was really horrific, and for some reason it's always been on my mind. I wouldn't mind donating there, but any kind of stuff like that would be a great target for charity. In the future, when my life is more in order, I'll literally post a little icon of where the super chats are going to go. But before I do that, I need to get to the system where I literally post the receipt. I will write off my taxes though, so I'll make money that way. So, but I think that's fine. I'll blank out my real name here. Not that I haven't been doxxed like 3 times over. So anyway, so let's see. I can't remember which way entropy goes, but maybe I'll post the entropy link into the chat again if you want to. If you want to either ask me a question, you can ask me a question using the @distributus thing. You can ask a question in the entropy chat. I'll probably read it, or you can donate some money and it will go to an unspecified charity that will be not more political than a pro-life cause. Okay, so Nerve AMV Maker for USA, $10. He says, going back to conservative fiction writers, it's worth noting that Russell Kirk was a writer of classic ghost stories that were very well received. His work was praised by Robert Eichmann, who was the greatest writer of weird fiction of the post-World War II era. Eichmann was also a total... Is it Eichmann? That sounds like the German Nazi official, very famously written about by Hannah Arendt. But Eichmann was also a total aristocrat. It's spelled with an A, I guess, so it's not Eichmann like the Nazi. But I actually had no idea that Russell Kirk was a classic ghost story writer. Classic ghost stories does appear to be an underdeveloped genre that's, I consider horror to be just implicitly something that's very right-wing. It's implicitly, since horror, to be good horror, has to be very grounded. This is why so every now and again they try this, so they do found footage and that works fairly well. But then they go from found footage horror movies, and this applies equally to something you'd buy in a book. They go from epistolary horror and found footage horror, and they try to take the next stage and they try to do digital horror. Like I think the most recent one was like horror that occurs on some kind of group chat, or maybe there's going to be a Snapchat horror movie. And for some reason, that just really doesn't work. It seems that in order for something, even a ghost story like The Ring, which is totally revolves around a modern technology of VCRs, in order for that to work, the technology has to be radically physical and radically grounded. If you're disembodied in some kind of digital experience, nothing can really reach you or impact you in the same way. It doesn't seem that horror really breaks through that veil very effectively. So I don't know. I think that there is, in some sense, a groundedness to horror that just is needed, or doesn't work as horror. But that's really, really good to know that Russell Kirk had that. I might look up some of his stuff. No one's asked Fritz Imperial for his anime recommendations. I think that he should do more videos on Warhammer and anime and stuff like that. I think that initially I was very negative on nerd culture, and I still am. I do like nerd culture a lot. I like 40K. I like science fiction and all that stuff. But I was very negative on nerd culture, qua nerd culture, and I made a whole series of videos on it. But I think it's necessary. I think that in many ways, this kind of dialectic is a necessary component. And I know that in my series of videos, I didn't universally condemn it. I wasn't like, oh, all nerd culture is horrible. It was much more directed criticism. But I think that a lot of people interpreted this as, oh, wow, we just have to be going to the classics. That's all there is to it. And I really admire something like Moby Dick. I read it last year. It's great. It will eternally be, in my opinion, known as the great American novel. And it does feel very much like it comes from the world of Over the Garden Wall. But dude, Melville does not translate very well into our modern world. He just doesn't. And so when you're talking about Melville, it comes with a big caveat that his ability to communicate with people is severely limited. Fritz Imperial's in the chat. He mentioned another one called Battletech. That's kind of vaguely on High Horizon. I believe it's kind of another one of these post-apocalyptic things. I think Razorfist did a video on that, or was it one of these 80s derived knockoffs of Battletech? I forget. Okay, so see Kevin Crow for USA $3. Recent music the composer should be aware of. needn't be NRX or Catholic. I just gave up on anything new 15 years ago. I may get back into composing. I guess videos would be necessary. I guess video would be necessary these days. Examples? Well, I don't know very much. I certainly haven't been aware of any new classical music. It seems like the whole modern classical music thing is completely dead. The last modern classical music that published new stuff that I found even remotely listenable was Philip Glass, which I know is sort of a bugman stereotype. If you ask any midwit urbanite what his favorite modern composer is, he'll say Philip Glass. He does all these really soothing minimalistic pieces, and a lot of them are used in Errol Morris documentaries, which are another thing that Blue Staters really like. I literally think both of those things were featured on Stuff White People Likes, the Stuff White People Likes website. But I still like him. I still think he's great. But beyond that, I can't think of any composers that I really liked, other than, of course, my lovely wife, Catholic wench, who composes music and has won many competitions for liturgical music. But I should say, like, like composers, like you have online friends that compose music, and you have friends from church that compose music and hosted on something like SoundCloud. I like a lot of those people, but I can't think off the top of my head of any big splash new composers or new music that I can really think of in the last 15 years. The last music thing that I really got into, or I guess two of them, there was sort of this new indie thing that came in the late 2000s. It was sort of prefigured by the Strokes in the early 2000s, but then it sort of came into its own around 2006, 2007. And then there was sort of this folk revival, which also had a similar trajectory. It sort of was revived in sort of a strange way by Oh Brother Where Art Thou's soundtrack. There was this free interest in bluegrass and folk music. And then it got more and more popular, and there were a lot of good acts that came up, and it kind of reached an apex just before the Great Awakening happened. And then the Great Awakening happened, and it seemed like everyone lost interest. The sort of quintessential example of one of these bands would be the Decemberists. And now this is more in the indie genre than it is in the bluegrass genre, but the Decemberists had kind of a folk sensibility to them. And maybe I'd make a video about the rise and fall of the Decemberists. That would be really interesting. And so I kind of see them as bridging the two genres. They did crossovers with Gillian Welch, who was more in the bluegrass scene. And another one would be Connor Oberst, also known as Bright Eyes. That would be another kind of folk musician that was indie too. It also did crossovers with Gillian Welch. And or is it Gillian Welch? Who knows? Anyway, the Decemberists, they did this sort of, their songs told stories, and these are sort of distinctly 19th century European stories. Stories about adventurers going off to sea, people who had great adventures, poor barrow boys pining after women of the upper class, chimbley sleeps, ghosts of dead children, all this stuff that you'd see in some kind of 19th century pulp novel of the sort of Charles Dickens variety. And their aesthetics were very kind of steampunky. And what's so ironic is that they also kind of include stories of the Pacific Northwest. There is one of their early songs that prominently features the Monoma County Library, which is the library that exists in Portland, Oregon, which I've been to many, many times. And so it was always kind of nice hearing these guys talk about these old European folk tales and then thinking, oh man, maybe the scene I'm in Portland and Seattle, maybe we're kind of playing out this role in history. We have some kind of generational mission to accomplish, and we're going to be part of this rich tapestry that goes back and forward and back. And that was kind of always my fancy when I was into the scene as a younger man. And then the whole scene got woke. And you're kind of sitting here with this thing going like, okay, so Decemberists, your Portlandians, your whole shtick is to be this kind of celebration of 19th century culture and this continuous Americana or this continuous Western history that stretches from Charles Dickens to the present day. And maybe there's always a villain to that, but now you're telling me that the whole thing is racist. It's this whole deal with Hamilton, too. I'm sorry I'm going on a digression, but that's what I do, so my apologies in advance. But there was this BreadTube vlogger, I forget what his name was. He did this sort of cringe, worshipful ode to ContraPoints, and I made fun of it at the time. I'm blanking on his name. But after he did this worshipful ode to ContraPoints, he made this criticism of Hamilton. Now, Hamilton's this new musical about the founding father Hamilton, except it's recast so that the entire cast is non-white. So it's sort of racially diverse casting, but this time to an extreme, so that an entirely white story is now entirely not white, and it has a hip hop soundtrack, which is cute and quirky, and all of the millennials of my generation love this. If you're a millennial and you're not a reactionary, you probably love Hamilton. And the music's catchy. I like the music. The music's good. I'm not a big musical person, but I like it in sparing quantities. In sparing quantities, the right, okay, whatever. But I'm forgetting this guy's name. But this SJW, this progressive guy, he said, if Hamilton were here, he'd probably be really racist. So Hamilton's kind of racist because it's getting us to idolize this racist guy. And our enlightened centrist pals, Adam and Sitch, gave him a lot of crap for this opinion. They said that, oh well, he's purity spiraling. Oh my God, you're going after Hamilton. What's next? What's going to come after Hamilton if this is racist? And I have to say, he's right. He's right about this. The joke is on people. All of the social justice warriors who love Hamilton, all of the progressives who think that this is just the shit. The diverse casting is reimagining our American Republic in a new non-racist light, because now it's all black people rapping about the Constitution or whatever. The joke's on them. I guarantee you, in 20 years, if not sooner, people will be making the same case that this is whitewashing history. This is taking a lot of people who would be racist and giving them a new veneer. We need to be more radical. And they're going to be condemned as racists for liking this non-racist version of the founding. And that's the same thing that's true with the Decembrists. You can't be a woke appreciator of ancient culture or of culture from 200 years ago without, in my mind, being completely fake. So if you're doing a woke founding fathers, it's not bad to me. It just seems fake to me. I know that you're going to get canceled by the future iterations of yourself. I know this is a whole pantomime where we're pretending like these founding fathers you're portraying would appreciate us, what we've become. And I know it's just a complete joke. You have no continuity with them. You hate them and they would hate you. And yet we have to go through this motion. We have to pretend like you're celebrating them. You're not celebrating them, you're condemning them. You can't celebrate and condemn at the same time. It's just like these people, you encounter them, they just depress me. I talked to another one this morning. It's so depressing. You talk to these progressives and they seem reasonable at first, like they're interested. And then you understand that their entire thought process is to create an analogy between you and Hitler. And once they do that, all they turn around to say, you believe this and Hitler believed this. So how are you not equivalent to Hitler? And you point out that this is the Hitler drank water fallacy. A bad person believed an idea, you do, so you're bad. And they don't register this. They just ignore it. They're like, oh, I'm not doing that. And then they continuously do that in different language. And then they just end the conversation with some kind of pronouncement about how you need to reflect on yourself morally. They morally judge you, and they don't even know who you are. And this just depresses me to no end. These people are just, their capacity to think, not really their capacity to think, their capacity to imagine something that's outside this narrow little gate of their own last 15 years is completely gone. They don't understand that they're condemning everyone before them as racist, and that they don't understand that part, but they also don't understand that everyone after them will condemn them as racist using the very logic they used to condemn the past themselves. It's soulless. I feel so bad for these people. I literally pity. I mean, pity is a very dangerous emotion because it's close to condescension. But I really do pity these people because they're just cutting themselves off from the richness of human experience in a really radical way. All right, so the next chat is from Ben White for $3. I recently got a job at a major bank. How should I, as a Catholic Chinese American, survive in modern America? I don't have a strong connection to either Chinese or American culture, and none of my, well, this is one half, so I'll look for the other half. Is it in the question? None of my ethnic friends share my religion. Should I stick it out in an arguably unserious industry and make a decent living for myself while hoping everything to continue as usual? Or should I just get as much money as I can in a short time and prepare to buy rural land and go off the grid? I love my Catholic community, but I fear that the left will come for them soon too. Well, I don't know. And this is something that I have to make a decision on too. First off, if you're Chinese American and Catholic, I'm going to look for this thing. There is a comic artist. I want to get this guy's name. The comic artist is Jean Luan Yang. And he wrote a comic called Chinese American. Hold on, let me make sure I'm getting the right person. Okay, yeah, he wrote a comic called American Born Chinese, and he wrote another historical comic called Boxers and Saints about Christian Chinese and Taoist Chinese and the Boxer Rebellion. It's this great little comic written from the two perspectives. It's sympathetic to both. The guy is Catholic himself. I'm sure he's progressive, but I always think, and I've always think that is sort of this really unique product that comes out of the Chinese American Catholic community. And it's about the contradictions of living a Christian life in a hostile society, which is always really, really good. But I'd recommend that. But let me answer your question more seriously. I don't know. I think sort of getting FU money and then getting out, if that were a button I could just press, I might recommend pressing it. But the problem is, and this is something that you don't get a lot of, getting FU money and then just getting out, that's not so simple. Very few jobs have this get FU money and then GTFO option in them. Most of them, in order to make a lot of money, you have to sort of implicitly sign on for the long term. Furthermore, you can sink a lot of time into a job and lose your soul to it and then never get enough money. So I'm of the opinion that the way you do things is that you have a job that you can support yourself in and save. And you save and invest wisely for the future, and then you keep your eyes open for free lottery tickets, opportunities to make a little bit of money, things like Ethereum or things like new technologies that could blossom but also are a little bit risky. And you play those sparingly, and then you just keep your ear to the ground and try to stay ahead of new developments. That's what I'm currently doing, but I don't think that you can make an unlivable life for yourself in the short term with the hopes that you'll make millions of dollars and then just live your life later. I think that you have to, at some level, have a livable life now, and that will involve some amount of living in truth and some amount of living in secret. And that's the task before us, is how do we do that? Now, if you have enough money, or if you have a job where you can just work remotely and then go to a rural area where they're not going to be able to find you, or that's more conservative, or that you just like, then I think that option's available for you. 100% pursue it. Most people have to develop a little bit of financial standing before they attempt something that's that risky. So without knowing the details, I think that's something that we have to be very, very careful about. I wouldn't recommend, if you're in your early 20s, I think the probability that you're ready to flee to the woods and homestead is probably very, very low. I think that if you're in your 20s, you need to sort of get yourself on good financial footing first. But I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity that's just lined up for you. I would say the number one thing you need to do, keep your ear to the ground and just look for things. We are in a very dynamic situation. Look for, if there's a danger that's coming for your Catholic community, it's going to come quickly. And your community is going to need to mobilize quickly. And there's no place that you can move where they can't come for you. So you need to be ready to move really, really quickly. We are now essentially a diaspora of people. We thought we had a home, we don't have a home. So more than trying to move someplace where they can't get you, you need to keep your ear to the ground so that you can be one step ahead of the law, so to speak. You need to be faster than them. In some sense, we can run, but we can't hide. And I think that hiding from them is a bad thing, but also running prematurely is going to cost you. So what you should do is you should find a good situation, which it sounds like you have, and then you need to listen very carefully for two things: new opportunities to make money or new opportunities to build community, which are related but distinctly different things. And then you need to keep your ear to the ground for new ways they're coming after us. And you need to make sure that your money is moved into locations where they can't get it. And your money is both your financial assets and also your community assets. If they're coming after schools, try to move towards extracurricular schooling. And that's not just homeschooling, but that's also moving your schooling. So obviously not everyone can afford to do homeschooling because there's a cost of time and money. But say, for instance, you want people to have a classical education. Move it to an extracurricular activity. Make it like Hebrew school is to Jewish kids, or Chinese school is to Chinese American kids. And the great thing about that is that your extracurricular school will be usable both by the homeschoolers and also by people who are availing themselves of public school. So it's little things like that, little opportunities, little danger, and your task is to move very quickly to the new opportunities and then move very quickly away from the new dangers, making sure that you disrupt your life as little as possible and your family and your finances as little as possible. Your task is to force the system to pay a lot of money to hurt you and to make their actions hurt you as little as possible in terms of finances and community. Avoid the taxes, avoid the regulations as much as you can, swallow what you have to, and then reject what is starkly immoral. And then your goal is to play a fast game. It's to move out ahead of them as fast as possible, to be where they're not. They can't be everywhere at once. And that's why running works and hiding really doesn't. Homestead if you can, because homestead makes it easier for you to evade them. But they're going to know where you are. It's just that homesteading makes it more expensive for them to actually hurt you. Okay, so I hope I answered that question sufficiently. Pringle Dingle for USA $3. I'm friends with an Orthodox catechumen, and it seems to channel his nerd collector impulse in at least a slightly more healthy way. Okay, I don't understand this, Pringle Dingle. I'm friends with an Orthodox catechumen, and it seems to channel his nerd collector impulse at least a slightly more healthy way. Are you talking about icons? I guess, I guess I'm assuming here that maybe I can catch it in the chat. I don't see anything in my questions tab on entropy. So I apologize, but I'm going to assume that you mean that his collection. Yeah, I can kind of say that. I guess religious, if you are somebody who likes, say for instance, doing handicrafts like I do. Maybe doing rosary construction or icon painting is a good outlet for that. I guess for me, I kind of like keeping them separate. I kind of like keeping my nerd stuff a little separate from my religious obligations. But I'm not so sure that's the right answer, to be quite honest, Pringle Dingle. I think that if you're someone who likes, as a relaxation mode, working with his hands, painting little things or whatever, maybe you should go full Jonathan Pageau. Everyone tells me I mispronounced that name. Maybe you should follow him and create icons and rosaries and stuff like that. Maybe that's more healthy. I guess to me there's danger on both ends, because on one hand you're doing something that's more holy, but on the other hand you are kind of mixing your peas and carrots a little bit. Catman for USA, $30. What university degrees should a right-winger consider? For example, is humanities and law dead to us? Only STEM left? Well, I mean, this is really simple. It's almost, I mean, I really appreciate the $30 super chat, Catman, but this is really, really simple rule. You should only go into a degree that you think that you're going to make money on in the long run. So that means the total amount of tuition you pay plus interest, that has to be exceeded by the amount of money you're going to make doing the thing. It doesn't matter how paused I mean, it does kind of matter how paused it is, right? But not so much. The biggest problem with the university system, some of it's indoctrination, but I do think that if you have a good head on your shoulders and you follow some good rules of thumb when it comes to segregating yourself emotionally from this stuff, you can keep your principles and go through college no problem. I think that's still possible, but it's not so much the major, it's having the plan that's the issue. Law is something that I would recommend to people. I think that you can be a good lawyer and make a lot of money. Law itself is paused this way and back. It's the source of all of our problems. If you go into law, you are essentially going into civil rights law, into new constitutional rights for some protected classes law. That is the law that is in operation with disparate impact and all of this stuff. It absolutely revolves around protected classes, and it's absolute garbage in my opinion. But that's not the issue. The issue with law is that there are way too many lawyers. And half the people I know who got law degrees, even people who are highly progressive, can't find good jobs as lawyers even after they pass the bar in some states. Now, maybe this isn't true everywhere. Maybe if you're in a particular state that has a very, very low ratio of lawyers to the general population, I don't know, maybe Utah might be a good example. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. I don't know if that's actually true. But from what I've seen in California and New York and these places, oh man, the demand for lawyers is super low. A STEM degree is a little bit different. I think that one thing is I need to clarify about this, because I went for a STEM degree and it's definitely earning me money, and it definitely earned me more money than I paid for it. So I can't bash it. But a lot of people in my generation, they thought that, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to get a STEM degree, and then I'm going to be an expert. And this expert status is going to mean I'm going to have a job for life. I'm not going to have to, I'm going to work in the corporate rat race, but I'm going to be this special kind of person who's just kind of his own thing, and I'm going to be independent from all the bullshit that goes on in the corporate world. That's not true. I think that might have been true at one point. If you were just like a computer whiz in the 90s, if you knew all of these languages, there was just so much demand for programmers in the 90s that if you were this massively awesome programmer who was a whiz, you weren't completely immune from the corporate bullshit, but you were in a separate compartment, right? You couldn't fire your only guy who knew how to program in Fortran or in C++ back in the 90s. There just weren't enough of them. These days, programming skills are super common, and STEM skills generally are super common. The ones that are like mechanical engineering or chemical engineering that are more hands-on, they're more niche than programming. The demands less. So as they get more specific, the number of people they train for them very, very quickly reaches saturation with the number of jobs there are available. So, when you get a STEM degree, I think it does pay for itself, but you're not paying, that degree is not going to make you an expert that has some degree of immunity. All it is going to be is a nice little star on your corporate resume. And you're going to have to make a name for yourself. You're going to have to play the corporate bullshit game, even with that STEM degree. I really hate to say it. I hate to experience it in my own life, but that's how it is. Yeah, so I just say the number one thing is have a plan. Just have a plan. If you can get to be a bank teller or a CPA, and that's how you can bring money in, do that. The only thing I can say very definitively is that I think that if you're thinking of being a right-wing YouTuber, I can pretty much attest to the fact that that's probably not a career that you can manage. I don't think anyone on the right wing is making money doing YouTube. If you do online right-wing blogging because you want to live in truth, please try to secure your identity as much as possible and have a contingency plan for the possibility that you could get doxxed. And just hope for the best. There's never going to be a kind of grift the way that there is on the left. There's never going to be the situation where if you can be a Vosh clone, you can just make a career out of it. There's a career as a Vosh clone. There's not a career as an Andy Worski clone or as an Ethan Ralph clone. There's just not. And neither is there a career being a Morgoth clone or a Distributus clone or even an Oren McIntyre clone or something like that. Like, there's no way to replicate what we're doing in a way that's going to be a career for you. The only reason why you participate in this space is because you want to have a conversation and you want to actually get to the truth of the matter. And that's what hurts me a lot, I guess, because I see these leftists and their number one thing is to augment their social media profile. That's their number one thing. That's what they're there for. And to me, it's just depressing. It's just really, really depressing to see that. I don't exactly know what to say. I see it because I know they're not NPCs. I know that they have a soul and they have curiosity in their other areas of life. But when you see them operate in these social media spaces, they're not NPCs, but they're in an NPC mode of thinking. Who are the good people? Who are the bad people? How do I get on the good side so I can make this part of my social media profile? That's it. All right, guys, so the questions have really calmed down. I will end the stream at 10 o'clock. If you want to ask me more questions, please use the question bar or the @Distributist sign, or you can send me an Entropy super chat if you want to do that. So yeah, about 50 more minutes. Let's see if I have any questions. Okay. So on the questions bars, what are your thoughts on the 3 days of darkness or anything related to Catholic esotericism as prophesized from saints? Well, okay, this is from a chat that is not paid, so I'll just answer it. So I regard esotericism and mysticism with a certain amount of skepticism and caution. I want to make it clear that I do embrace the Catholic belief in relics and in esotericism generally, but I feel that specific devotion to this kind of stuff is very, very risky. I think that if you participate in esotericism or any kind of mysticism, it's really an extreme sport. It's very, very dangerous. It leads to a lot of mistakes, and I think it's not for the faint of heart. I think it's attractive for young people because it offers a certain amount of mystery and poetry for what appears to be not very much cost. And it's kind of sexy, right? If we're being honest about it. But I don't think that it's actually good to focus on that. I think that you should really focus on the core of the religion first. And if there's going to be any kind of community, community is pretty antithetical with esotericism. A community is built from the grassroots. It's not going to involve things like secret societies or, mystical beliefs, even if they are legitimate mystical beliefs, even if those societies are good secret societies, kind of like the Knights of Columbus, which is it's kind of like a secret society, right? So another question says, what about Samo Berja or Michael Millerman? Isn't what they're doing a viable path? I don't know who is Samo Berja. Michael Millerman sounds interesting. But are these people like Claremont Review people? They sound like Claremont Review people. I mean, sure. I mean, you're going to get, these old academics that have managed to eke out a living for themselves on the underbelly, on the dying underbelly of the Republican establishment. I think that's a pool of money that's drying up fast. I don't think there's that room for that many more heads on that particular trough. Okay, someone's saying religion is mystic, you dunce. Okay, you dunce. But when I talk about mysticism in religion, I'm talking about a very specific thing. So just like Judaism has mysticism in it, like Kabbalah is not Judaism proper. It's the mystic section of the religion. So when I say mystic inside a religion, I'm talking about the specific area of the religion that focuses on esoteric devotion. So for instance, you'll see a lot of people like Hildegard von Bingen who participate in things like speaking in weird languages and having mystic dreams and exploring these kind of things that ordinary believers don't participate in. If you read people like St. Teresa of Avila, she also has this kind of mystic dimension to her where she's exploring this interior castle of spirituality. This kind of mystical experience is not the kind of ordinary experience believers practice when we do things like take sacraments or pray the rosary. It's in a category beyond that. And typically Christians have been very, very cautious with this area of our religion. It is absolutely true. It is absolutely something that is there, but it's something that should only be approached by kind of pros, or if you're really, really invested in finding the truth. Don't do mysticism if you're just trying to do something that looks cool. Yeah, I think you really need to master the basics of your religion first. And I certainly haven't done that. Okay, any more questions? This is another thing too. I've noticed this a lot about the right wing, is that since the loss in 2020 of Trump, the whole right wing sphere has gotten a lot meaner. It's really weird, but there are just people who will just go out of their way to just absolutely trash you, and for really no reason. And I think it's because people are angry they're kind of in the anger stage of the grieving process. They don't understand that just because you're on the right wing and the right wing lost, that you're not responsible for that. Or they think that I'm running some kind of grift, even though I don't make any money off this channel. So it's, Samo Berja is running a consulting company and Palladium magazine. Something like the American Mind. Millerman is a philosopher associated with Toronto University, talking about Dugan. Well, yeah, I mean, sure. And if you have tenure in a modern university and you can find a path, Toronto University is pretty woke. Wait, is it Toronto University, University of Toronto, right? That's pretty woke. So I imagine that Millerman either has tenure or he's managed to not step on the right landmines. But, I don't know if your plan is, if you're like one of these people who's asking me in the chat, I'm a 20-year-old going into college, what's a life plan? Am I going to tell you, oh, yeah, okay, study esoteric philosophy from these reactionary authors, and then maybe you have possibility of becoming a tenured professor at one of the most woke universities in the North American continent. I can't responsibly tell that to a young person because the probability of pulling that off is minusculely small right now, and it's likely only to get it harder. So what I want to say is absolutely study these people if you want the truth. But if you're planning to become a tenured professor and then, run a reactionary blog on the side, I mean, good luck pulling that double life. I really mean it. I would love to see more of these people. But I think there's a reason why you don't see very many of these people, and that's because it's just such a hard line to run. I think I'm actually subscribed to Palladium magazine, and I think it's good. But yeah, and I want to see more of this stuff. But I think that you have to be 100% independent. And running a consulting firm is something that's not easy to do. It's very, very time consuming. And so, absolutely try this, but I'm not going to say it's an easy path. And also, it depends on you reading the signs of the time. Because if you start now and your goal is to become an independent consultant, well, independent consultancy is all about understanding what the industry wants to know, and that changes every 10 years. And it takes at least 10 years of training to be a technical expert. So by the time you get the necessary education and background to be a consultant, what people want to be consulted about is going to completely change. So you have to be listening constantly for what's actually going on in order to make that plan work. Okay. Someone's saying that NRX needs to scale a little bit and get on channels like Tim Pool. Yes and no. NRX would do well to scale up if it can maintain quality of people as it scales up. The last thing you want is for the cathedral and other NRX concepts to become like the red pill. The red pill was a concept invented by Yarvin, just like the cathedral was, but it's been horrifically abused and now just a catch-all for anyone who wants to sell you an idea that's not progressive, as opposed to meaning something very, very specific, as it did when Yarvin wrote about it under unqualified reservations back in 2006, I think. And the last thing you want is to dilute your ideas to the point where they just become buzzwords. You want people to embrace your ideas in their fullness as much as possible. And so, yeah, I'm very happy for more people to learn about this stuff, to think about this in productive ways. But I'm not interested in just becoming a pop. I'm not interested in becoming like Tim Pool and just telling people, because Tim Pool tells people what they want to hear. That's why he told people that they could expect a 50-state Trump win in October, and then he's got blown away by the fact that Biden won. And sure, maybe there was some fortification involved in that election. I'm not going to lie. Time magazine has claimed that there was indeed fortification occurring in that election. But the fortification does not account for the difference between, I technically won in the Electoral College and a 50-state win. That is a statistical misperception, orders of magnitude beyond what was accomplished by election fortification in 2020. Just an order of magnitude beyond what we're even talking about here. Okay, well, someone asked me if I had, Chris X says, and I have a question if you're going to stay on longer. If you ask me a question in the question bar or with an distribute this thing, and I see it, I'll stay on for a little bit longer. But when we hit 10, I'm going to be kind of looking to wrap it up, and I'm not seeing any more questions here, either in the question box or in the distribute this thing. So I'm led to believe that no one has any more questions. I will say that, I don't know. I guess my question right now is how I'm going to manage my own personal profile online. I think for a minute there, I was thinking Substack would be the way, but the Substack essays take me a lot longer than creating videos of a similar length because they have to go through text first. I'm very slow at writing text. And so I don't know, maybe I should just go back to the old way of doing things. But then, you know, I'm predominantly a YouTuber, and they can take they could take it right off the they can just take it down anytime they want to, right? It's completely dependent on Google. Guys, if you have a question and it's an at reply, you have to actually re-ask the question. You can't just assert that you asked me a question, because my chat refreshes, and if it's not a super chat, I have no record of it existing. And don't ask me if you can ask a question. Ask me a question, okay? Because asking me if you can ask a question is not actually a question I can answer. It's not, right? You know, I can answer it if 15 minutes, right, from now. Okay, so good YouTubers, Charlemagne, Closington, RN McIntyre. There is a new YouTuber called Unskilled Labor. There's a Mencius Molebug explanation channel called Animathesis, which I can never pronounce correctly, which I absolutely love. He does great work. There is a neo-reactionary audiobook channel called Skeptical Waves that I highly recommend for NRX audiobooks, or from just audiobooks generally. Everyone knows that the Franklin is a great channel. Luke Smith is a great channel. I think that these channels are just so. I feel like I've plugged these people a lot. I feel very, very unoriginal plugging them again. I probably should just come up with a link tree and just repost it every time. You know, it's a Last Things too. I forgot not to be excluded. Last Things is a great YouTube channel. I really like his analysis. I plug his analysis of The Boys. He did a 3-part video, but I haven't finished it yet, so I can't plug what I haven't finished. Here's a great question. I'm getting more questions now. What do you think of the cottagecore aesthetic and metropolitan density? Okay, cottagecore. 2 words for you about why it's good, but I'm not really resting my hat on it. Steampunk. I'm burned by steampunk. The most base aesthetics ever in steampunk. Victorian aesthetics, interest in the classics, all that. The most absolutely progressive, degenerate, backstabbing, backbiting community imaginable. Steampunk was 0% content and 100% pro-felicity. There was no authenticity in that aesthetic whatsoever. If cottagecore is actually a lived experience and not something that's just an Instagram filter, then maybe we can talk about something. If cottagecore actually has principles and actually organizes people against the main mode of society, then maybe we can talk about it. But if this is going to be steampunk 2.0 and it's a Victorian aesthetic over a degenerate life, if this is going to be people who are talking the talk but not actually living it out, then please count me out, because I have no desire to actually waste my time on another one of these belly flops where progressives systematically try to wear the skin of the old world and pretend like there's something more than people running on the same treadmill, getting all excited about Hamilton, when we all know that that same thing is going to be racist in 30 years, heck, maybe 5 years. Who knows? Things are moving fast, right? Okay, great. How does liberalism make few? So here's the question that was sort of said was going to be long. So I'll answer it. Maybe I'll answer it more in a more lengthy way on the next distance. How does liberalism make fewer societal promises than a system like feudalism? I don't buy the societal promise-breaking bubble. That's easy. The feudal promises were rock solid. If a vassal promised something to a lord and he broke his promise, they just kill him. Whereas the promises our society makes now, who knows what they're going to make? So, like, for instance, if I'm a shoemaker, right, and I have a son, I can essentially promise him that he can be a shoemaker. And if he is a good shoemaker, if he's not an alcoholic, if he follows the rules of his society, if he makes good shoes, then he will have the life I had. That's a promise that I can make to him. That's not a promise that anyone can make anymore. I'm an engineer. I'm a coder of sorts right now. I wouldn't want to give that to my son because I have no assurance that that's going to be something that my son participates in or can't participate in. That whole promise is not there. The amount of trust in our society, do I know my neighbors? No. In some sense, I fear my neighbors more than I trust them. If you go back to my father's generation, that wasn't true. In the 80s, when I was born, that wasn't true. People knew their neighbors, they trusted their neighbors. There was an assumption that, oh, well, his parents got a college education, so if he gets a college education, he'll have a middle-class lifestyle. Promise is not there anymore. They don't trust their neighbors. The only thing they trust is the government. It's been centralized. Furthermore, if you go back even further to my grandparents, they were born in a small town on the Danube. They had the same lifestyle that people had in that town for hundreds of years, going back to the original migration into that region of Eastern Europe. It was an incredibly stable life. The stability is the promise, and the stability creates the trust. Without trust and without promises fulfilled, all you have is sort of this mercenary chaos. The only thing that we can put our faith in right now is the word of the US federal government and money. Everything else, all the promises made from other institutions, are much less reliable than they were before. That's not saying that you should not trust them. Ultimately, I think the federal government's promises and money, which actually, come to think of it, they're both the same thing, right? They're both essentially the reliability of the Federal Reserve to manage currency in line with real or perceived growth. But I think that ultimately all promises beyond that are ridiculous. And then I guess there's the entitlement systems, right? Like the entitlement systems make promises to us, and they're very, very reliable. In some sense, I think that after what's happened in 2020 and 2021, increasingly more and more of the economy is just going to be pure entitlements. The entitlements is going to grow to be an enormous percentage of the GDP, and in which case, the economy of the entire country is going to merge into the same question about the reliability of our currency. In which case, we've gone from a society that made multiple promises and had multiple institutions we trusted into a society that's entirely bound up into one promise, which is the federal government's promise to pay out entitlements in a currency that actually has meaning to purchase products in a global supply chain. So I guess I'd answer that question. I'd say that we've gone from a lot of promises to one big promise, which doesn't even appear to be very reliable if you think about it for very long. So not such a long question. Maybe if you want to elaborate, next distance I'll ask it. Or I answer it, sorry. What are some good, obscure Christian readings? Well, I mentioned St. Teresa of Avila, but that's not for the faint of heart at all. Obscure Christian readings. Oh, there's so many of them. I'll do a bookshelf stream one of these days, or I guess video. About your idea about a setting for fiction, I don't get it. What's the point? So what if we have a red-pilled MTG or video games? Warhammer is already kind of red-pilled. Dune too. Well, the idea is that it would be easier to make culture inside a sphere that was not owned by a corporation, and that had some reasonable expectation of not following a woke trajectory. Like, Warhammer is a great example. It is essentially a reactionary piece of fiction. The problem is it's owned by a woke corporation. So if we were, first of all, you can't use Warhammer. So you can't use Warhammer means to tell independent, reactionary, or non-progressive stories. That's impossible because, especially after this last month, Games Workshop's going to come after you and shut down your channel, or sue you, or put up obstacles. And if that wasn't enough, the setting itself is probably going to be wokeified in very, very short order. And I say that with quite a heavy heart, because the wokeification of Warhammer will be the death of it. But make no doubt, Warhammer will be wokeified sooner rather than later, most likely. And when that happens, you're either going to have to go along with wokehammer, or you're going to have to find some alternative. And my only question about a fiction setting is how that we front run that problem. how we get out ahead of it. It's that simple. So how realistic is dropping your affiliation with an institution and starting your own online course service? I mean, if someone like Justin Murphy can do it, well, okay. I mean, I don't know much about Justin Murphy, but I do know the Academic Agent did this, and it appears to be somewhat successful, if I'm not mistaken. I guess technically I could do that. I'm not really a qualified academic in this sense. But maybe we're all going this direction. This is a good example. This questioner is asking me, starting your own academic online thing. I think that's actually a really good idea. I think, it hasn't been as successful as I would have liked it to be right now, but it shows promise for the future. So that might be something that, what happens is these things are great ideas, but they're just a little bit ahead of their time. For instance, for those of you, I was sort of a conservative. I kind of did this weird trajectory where I was a libertarian, and then I briefly went to conservatism before going and becoming a sort of shitlib libertarian Obama voter. And back in the day, there was this website called Instapundit, and Michelle Malkin, who was an early sort of reactionary. That's what she was, but this is before even unqualified reservations. And I don't know if this was something that Instapundit did, but it was certainly an affiliated site. Michelle Malkin did these videos where she commented on, in video form, in video essay form, she commented on sort of crazy progressive stuff that was going on in colleges. And her whole video series just bombed. It just bombed. The conservative movement wasn't ready for a video medium. Nobody really was watching videos about politics at that stage. They were too short. They weren't in depth enough, and there was talk radio to contend with, and no one bought it. But really, she had the right idea. She just got the idea 10 years before it would take off. And it could be that what Justin Murphy is trying and what Academic Agent is trying, it's too early, in which case, absolutely, try it. If you think it's too early, try to get in early. Okay, so someone's asking me, how does all of this not just become Brave New World? I think it is becoming Brave New World, so that's an easy question to answer. On homesteading, what are your opinions on a possible tax, regulation, weapons to employed by the state, and how do we organize communities to minimize them? Are co-ops possible? The question is, I would expect taxes and regulation to come down on homesteaders, absolutely. We'll have to have some kind of political organization that can resist this, either legalistically, but putting roadblocks in the way of this, maybe a tax revolt. I can't legally recommend that on YouTube. Susan, I don't actually mean that. That is a joke. Yeah, I would expect that. And I would absolutely encourage people to try co-ops. Actually, a reactionary co-op would be really, really funny, because you could sort of try to embarrass BreadTube by making it based and then having them condemn it. Well, no, Vosh just guzzles money down his own private business gullet and tries to explain it all through consequentialism. Consequentialism, leftists always have these words that are just panaceas for avoiding their own shit. None of them believe anything they say. But in order to cover their own tracks and cover their own lies, during the ContraPoints era, it was tu quoque. So as soon as you recognize that a liberal didn't actually follow his own principles, all he would say is tu quoque, as if pointing it out was a fallacy in itself. And of course, it doesn't mean anything. If the only point you're trying to make is you don't live up to your principles, saying tu quoque is meaningless. Tu quoque is only a fallacy if you're having a larger moral question. It's completely immaterial when it comes to a moral indictment of the person himself. But the next one in the Bosch era of BreadTube, the get out of jail free card is consequentialism. Eventually that will get old. Dave, are you Jewish? No, I am not Jewish. I am not religiously Jewish. I have some fraction under 5% that's Jewish in my DNA that wouldn't even qualify under the Nuremberg laws as being Jewish. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, all of the race-obsessed people who want to indict the NRX as being Jewish. I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but I am not Jewish in any way that could possibly be meaningful. All right, so since I'm not seeing... Okay, someone's asking me, there's a way that 40K isn't red-pilled, it assumes the Emperor... Yeah, there's a lot of sort of shitlib talking points in 40K already. Would you prefer life as a serf to the one... So Chris X has a follow-up. Would you prefer the life as a serf to the one that you live? I don't understand neo-reactionary romanticism of the past. So Chris X, this is the big problem. I would not prefer a life of the serf because of technology. I want penicillin. I want washing machines. I want leisure time. Those are all created by technology. When it comes to thick social organizations, having a community, having beliefs, having meaning in your life, having an ability, having some amount of autonomy, read Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State. There are a lot of individual elements of the life of a serf that were actually preferable to ours. You're falling into, Chris X, you're falling into the trap that they're using to enslave us. They're saying that because we have better iPods now, we can never look to the past and realize that in some way the past was better than what we have now. If you do that, you will forever be a slave to the global ruling technocracy. They'll say things like, oh, well, we couldn't go back to the 90s because now we have like this kind of treatment for cancer, because now we have iPhones. Do you really want to give up iPhones just so you can have a thicker social community and not have people constantly being canceled for their non-woke opinions? Do you really want that? And it's just bullshit. They're saying that, okay, because we have better technology now, I can essentially veto your observation about how things have manifestly gotten worse in terms of social trust. And it's just basically a way that our ruling class evades responsibility for their own mismanagement of our society. I really have very, very little tolerance of this stuff. I know that it's very, very hard to disaggregate technological increase from how society is organized, but you can still do it. You can still go back to the Victorians and go, look, even with less technology, it was a more literate society in 1920 than it was in 2020. How is that? How is it that even though they didn't have penicillin, even though they didn't have iPads, people still were way more literate back then? People still had way more social cohesion. How come more technology didn't make our lives better in that way? I think you could absolutely put that indictment towards society. And if we can't, I'm sorry. If the new iPad is going to veto any realization that things have gotten manifestly worse, even in our own lifetime, I'm sorry, but Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos will forever rule your life. They will forever be able to use the next software update as a way to veto your own observation about your life getting materially worse. I don't want to be bound to the land like a medieval serf, but I do want to have more autonomy in what I choose to do with my day, like the medieval serf did, like Hilaire Belloc describes in The Servile State. We can choose qualities in isolation from different times and say, hey, wouldn't we like to have the literacy of the Victorian era, the thick meaning of the medieval era, the instant communication of our own era? Why couldn't we pick individual elements and then we could try to find solutions that would allow us to have all these different elements and try to bring them together? The only way we can go forward and actually have progress rather than just degeneracy is to decide what kind of people we want to be and then try to be those people using the technology as a means and not an end. There's no other way other than to do it. And if we're going to do it that way, we have to veto this idea that iPads mean that we cannot admire the Victorian age. I'm sorry, but just fuck that logic. So guys, it's really late and I'm out of super chats and the questions are getting way too long. So I think that I will end the stream here and maybe later in the week we'll do more of a full question and answer series. But I think that last question was a very good note to end on. So we'll have to sort of pause it here, and I'll wish you all a good night and happy Feast of the Assumption.